Chapter 34:13. I say, isn't this place a little too strange? Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with disbelief. I can't even see a single plant. Could this be another place similar to the demonic abyss? The demonic abyss was also barren. There was nothing else on the entire island other than the demonic tower. Now that you mention it, I do feel that this place is rather similar. Xiren smiled faintly. However, this place doesn't have the slightest bit of blood qi. On the contrary, it's filled with the aura of death. Perhaps it's because too many people have died here. Bailey Hongzhuang was not as optimistic as Xiren because White Lion had just told her a piece of news. This news gave her an ominous feeling. Wife, what are you thinking about? Di Baichen noticed a change in Bailey Hongzhuang's expression and could not help but ask. White Lion told me that there are no demonic beasts auras within 100 miles. Isn't this too strange? Bailey Hongzhuang lifted her eyes to look at Di Baichen. We should be heading to the training grounds to hunt demonic beasts. However, there are no demonic beasts here. So what are we doing here? Di Baichen was stunned when he heard this. His gaze then landed on White Lion. White Lion, are you sure? I'm sure. White Lion nodded his head. There's indeed no aura of demonic beasts around here. I feel that there are no other demonic beasts in this area. This environment is not suitable for demonic beasts to live in. Although White Lion's words were hard to understand, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest believed in his judgment. As a beast king, he understood demonic beasts the best. He could sense their auras in a wide range. Since White Lion had said so, there must be no demonic beasts nearby. That's strange. If there are no demonic beasts here, are we just here to stay? When Xiren was confused, they had planned to come here to obtain the essence gallbladders and exchange them for merit points so that they could cultivate in the cultivation area. Since there were no demonic beasts here, it meant that it was impossible to obtain essence gallbladders here. If so, what were the inner hall disciples doing here? The four of them looked at each other. No one could give a definite answer. This matter was really too strange. Little Black and Little White also jumped down from Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulders at this moment. It was precisely because they didn't know why that they had a very bad feeling. Master, let's go ahead and take a look. Go. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three carefully walked forward. Although they didn't sense any movement in their surroundings, they were still very careful. In this unknown environment, anything could happen. After Xiao He and Xiao Bai left for a while, they quickly returned. Master, we saw some inner hall disciples in front. However, they all looked seriously injured. I'm afraid this place is really dangerous. Hearing Xiao He and Xiao Bai's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest's eyes lit up. As long as they could see other cultivators, they would at least know what was going on here. Where are they? Bailey Hongzhuang quickly asked. In this direction. Xiao He pointed ahead. Follow me and Xiao Bai. All right, lead the way. Chapter 34:14. Just as Xiao He and Xiao Bai had said, the closer Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three got to the front, the more they could hear some subtle movements. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three arrived at the place where Xiao He and Xiao Bai were. In their line of sight, there were about 20 cultivators sitting together in a circle. A faint smell of blood spread from them, and they could clearly see some ghastly wounds on their bodies. Bailey Hongzhuang only took a quick glance and could tell that these people's injuries were extremely serious. She could not help but be shocked. These people's auras were not weak. She did not expect them to be so seriously injured. This proved that the threat here must be very powerful. However, they had not encountered anything so far. After the cultivators noticed some movements behind them, they could not help but tense up. However, after noticing the familiar clothes on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, they relaxed a little. We're on the same side, the leader of the cultivators said, indicating that there was no need to be nervous. The other cultivators also put down their weapons. However, their curious gazes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Oh, for unfamiliar little fellows have come. I've never seen you guys before. A man smiled and said. There was not the slightest hint of unfamiliarity or alienation in his attitude. Are you the disciples who have just passed the advancement assessment? I've never seen you guys before. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three could not help but look at each other. Di Beichun said, "Isn't this the training ground for the Outer Palace disciples?" Although they had already concluded that they had been deceived by Li Shangkai and the others, it was still better to ask and clarify everything. As Di Beichen's voice fell, the cultivators present couldn't help but stare blankly. Their eyes flashed with a thick color of astonishment. "You guys are Outer Palace disciples?" The leader looked shocked. "Why are Outer Palace disciples here? Do you want to die?" At this moment, another woman by the man's side spoke out. "They are indeed Outer Hall disciples. Look carefully at their clothes. Those are the uniforms of Outer Hall disciples." Although the costumes of the Penglai Palace disciples looked roughly the same, there was still a slight difference between the costumes of the Inner and Outer Palace disciples. Laymen might not be able to tell, but as disciples of Penglai Palace, they could still tell. It was just that no one had thought about it before, so they did not pay attention to it at all. Now that they heard Di Beichen's words, they began to notice the difference in clothing. After Di Beichen and the other three heard the man's answer, they knew that their judgment was correct. They had indeed come to the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples. "Where is this?" When Ziren pretended to be confused and looked at the people in front of him in confusion. "Have we come to the wrong place? It seems that these four little fellows have been tricked." The woman shook her head. There was a hint of helplessness in her expression. "However, the guys who tricked you guys are ruthless enough. Did you guys just join the Penglai Palace?" Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three nodded in unison. "We did just join the Penglai Palace." Chapter 34:15. Newcomers have actually been tricked into coming here. Looks like you're quite hated. The man in the lead chuckled. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Ren Zihang from the Inner Hall. This is my sister, Ren Zimei. Senior brother Ren, senior sister Ren." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three clasped their hands together. Ren Zihang had given them a good impression, but they had already suffered at the hands of Li Shangkai once. As a result, they were not surprised by the enthusiasm of the two. Ren Zimei nodded. "You should rest here for a while. This is a training ground for Inner Hall disciples. It's far too dangerous for you to be here with your cultivation, so it's best if you stay with us. Don't act alone, or you'll only lose your life. Do you understand?" Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were enlightened by Ren Zimei's words of concern. "Senior sister Run, then can we go back directly?" When Ziren asked. Since they had already acted like they did not know that they had been tricked, they naturally had to act until the end. Ziren was undoubtedly an expert at acting, so he took the opportunity to get more information from Ren Zimei and the others. Ren Zimei sighed when she saw that Ziren did not understand the situation at all. "No. There's still half a month before the next teleportation formation activates. You won't be able to return during this time. Follow us during this time. We're still very safe here for now. Everyone is recuperating here. Once the teleportation formation activates, you can return with your injured seniors. Before you become Inner Hall disciples, don't come here again. Senior sister, may I ask what dangers there are here?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked curiously. "We didn't notice any movements along the way. There didn't seem to be any monster beasts." As the voice of Bailey Hongzhuang fell, the faces of the more than 20 Inner Palace disciples changed a bit, and their expressions were a bit complicated. Ren Zimei did not answer Bailey Hongzhuang. Instead, she turned to look at Ren Zihang. Ren Zihang pondered for a moment before he said, "Outer Palace disciples aren't allowed to enter the training grounds of the Inner Palace, and the situation here isn't something that Outer Palace disciples can understand. However, since you're going to stay here for half a month, I'm afraid it's impossible for you not to know. Before I tell you, you have to promise not to tell anyone else about this place. Otherwise, once the news gets out, you will be severely punished. Believe me, this punishment is not something you can bear." Seeing the grave expressions of Ren Zihang and the others, the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were also somewhat complicated. They did not understand just how mysterious this training ground was. They had only tried to understand how serious the situation was. "Senior brother Ren, don't worry. After we leave, we will definitely not mention a single word about this place." A sliver of seriousness appeared on Di Beichen's handsome face. His eyes shone with sincerity and steadiness. Although they did not know just what was so special about this place, since Ren Ziheng and the others were so serious, there must be a reason. As such, they just had to abide by it. At the same time, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others nodded as well, indicating their sincerity. Chapter 34:16. It's because it's daytime right now, so you haven't come across any danger along the way. If it's nighttime, it's very likely that you'll lose your life just by walking the path you just took. Ren Ziheng smiled faintly. The expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but change when they heard that. They had only spent a quarter of an hour to get here from the teleportation formation. According to Ren Ziheng, they would lose their lives in such a short journey. Just how dangerous was this place? There are no monstrous beasts in this place at all. There are only contracted beasts of us cultivators. Every time Ren Ziheng said a word, the doubts in Bailey Hongzhuang's heart couldn't help but deepen. Bailey Hongzhuang lowered her head to look at Bai Shi. It seemed that everything was as Bai Shi had said. There really were no monstrous beasts here. The four of them stared at Ren Ziheng. They could not understand where the so-called danger came from since there were no monstrous beasts here. Here, our enemies are skeletons, Ren Ziheng said in a deep voice. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but be stunned when they heard that. They stared at Ren Ziheng in surprise, unable to wrap their heads around it. Skeletons? Bailey Hongzhuang raised her voice slightly, filled with surprise and confusion. There are skeletons here? Deep Beichen and the others were also confused. This was the first time they had heard of skeletons. They had never heard of such things before. Ren Ziheng nodded. I know you're very surprised. When we first found out that the Inner Palace disciples were training in a place like this, we were also very surprised. However, there are indeed skeletons here. Moreover, there are countless skeletons here. These skeletons rest during the day and come out at night. As a result, the night is the most dangerous time. As skeletons, these fellows do not need to use their eyes to observe their surroundings. What they observe is the vitality of humans. On the other hand, it's much more difficult for us to deal with skeletons at night. Moreover, these skeletons are different from demon beasts. They're inanimate objects, so they can't feel any pain. Unless their spirits are extinguished, they will continue to fight. When Ren Ziheng said all this, Ren Zimei and the surrounding cultivators looked helpless. It was obvious that the skeleton had brought them a lot of trouble. Listening to Ren Ziheng's introduction, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others only felt that Ren Ziheng was telling them about a world that they had never understood before. Skeletons, they never thought that skeletons would have fighting strength, and they were not afraid of pain. They were simply abnormal existences. The other party was an inanimate object and did not fear death at all. On the contrary, cultivators like them were at a complete disadvantage. Senior Brother Run, I don't understand why there are skeletons here. When Xiren frowned, this was beyond his imagination. We've never heard of this before. Some cultivators' corpses contain some resentment or are buried in places where the aura of darkness is very dense. Gradually, they will turn into skeletons and possess a certain level of combat power. They will come out at night to cause trouble. Chapter 34:17. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three nodded their heads in understanding. They had already noticed the difference in this place the moment they arrived. The feeling of death and the dense dark aura made them feel an indescribable sense of oppression, coupled with the rotten smell in the air. Although they had not personally seen the skeletons that Ren Ziheng had mentioned, they had already believed it in their hearts. This place was indeed very suitable for skeletons to live. This place is indeed filled with an indescribable sense of strangeness. However, we don't understand why the Inner Palace disciples would want to train here. What are the benefits of fighting these skeletons? Rather than that, wouldn't it be better to deal with the demon beasts? Shangguan Yingying looked at Ren Ziheng curiously. Just entering this place made people feel very uncomfortable. When she thought about staying here for such a long time, she could not help but feel a chill down her spine. Although demon beasts were scary, they were still living beings. However, facing skeletons, just imagining that scene was somewhat unacceptable. The range of these skeletons' development is getting bigger and bigger. Not only will human cultivators become skeletons, but demon beasts will also become demon beast skeletons after death. You have not personally witnessed the destructive power of these skeletons, so you don't understand. If these skeletons are allowed to continue developing, this continent will very likely become the world of skeletons. Currently, all the major forces are thinking of ways to suppress the development of these skeletons. Therefore, everyone has a certain tacit understanding to not spread this news to avoid causing panic. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three looked at each other in dismay. Their hearts were filled with shock. They never knew that such a terrifying existence as skeletons existed in the Shengxian continent. However, when they thought about how so many Purple Realm 7th level and above cultivators had suffered such serious injuries, if these skeletons were allowed to continue developing, then the situation would indeed be a little scary. Fortunately, this was Penglai Island. If these skeletons were to develop outside, then it would be a complete disaster. So, all the major forces are taking it as their responsibility to eliminate these skeletons. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly said, "That's right." Ren Ziheng said, faintly, "Originally, the Outer Palace disciples were not able to come into contact with this level, so naturally, they did not need to bear any responsibility. However, now that you have come into contact with this level ahead of time, dealing with skeleton has nothing to do with you for the time being. However, sealing off this information is also your responsibility." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. "Senior Brother Run, I understand. Don't worry, we will definitely not spread this news." At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had all understood why the strength of the Inner Palace disciples was so strong, but there were often casualties, and why the number of Inner Palace disciples could never grow. It turned out that there was such a secret in the Inner Palace. Compared to the Outer Palace disciples who only focused on their own cultivation, the Inner Palace disciples undoubtedly had an additional layer of responsibility. They also had an additional layer of protection around them. This kind of responsibility was not something that an ordinary person could bear. Immediately, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were filled with admiration for the Inner Palace disciples. In order to prevent these skeletons from affecting the ordinary people of the Shengxian continent, they were fighting with their lives on the line. Chapter 34:18. Seeing the admiration in the eyes of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, a faint smile appeared on Ren Ziheng's face. "I've told you so much, but I don't see any fear on your faces. The place where we are now is a place where the frequency of skeletons is low, so everyone is healing here. The other disciples who are not injured are outside, waiting to kill the skeletons at night. The injured disciples will come here. Zime and I will be responsible for protecting you, so it's relatively safe for you to stay here. Don't try to explore the dangerous places outside. When you become an Inner Palace disciple, this responsibility will automatically fall on you." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three nodded. "We will work hard to become an inner disciple." Hearing this, Run Zime smiled faintly. "I feel that you are very familiar with each other. I always feel that one day you will become an inner disciple of the Inner Palace. Although it's still a little far away, I believe that you will succeed in the future." At the same time, the other injured disciples also started to laugh. "I also think that these guys have the potential to become Inner Palace disciples. After all, they had just joined the Outer Palace and were already tricked into coming here. It can be seen that they are extremely hated in the Outer Palace." As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three could not help but look at each other. Their expressions were a little awkward. It had to be said that their popularity in the Outer Palace was a little too bad. At this time, Run Ziheng laughed and scolded. "Come on, you were also very arrogant when you were in the Outer Palace. There are many people who wanted to teach you a lesson. Yes, that's why I feel that they have the potential to become inner disciples. If they're like those guys who pretend to be obedient, scheming everywhere, there is no meaning at all. Moreover, in my opinion, it is because they have the ability that they are schemed to be schemed against. Have you seen anyone who is not strong enough get schemed against?" The man shrugged indifferently, as if he was not ashamed, but proud. Rin Ziheng shook his head helplessly. Come on, no matter what you say, you are right. So, is this also a compliment to us? Shangguan Yingying was startled. She originally thought that the man was mocking them, but after listening to the conversation between him and Rin Ziheng, it did not seem to be mocking them, but praising them. Haha, that's right. I am praising you. The inner disciples present also smiled and nodded. The originally gloomy atmosphere suddenly became cheerful. Rin Zimei chuckled. To be honest, none of the inner hall's disciples are peaceful people. Things like being cheated happen all the time. However, as long as they can endure it, their development will be equally astonishing. Geniuses were always somewhat out of tune with others. Because of their own excellence, there were people's faces. They had long been used to it. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were a little surprised by the situation in front of them. It seemed that they had found a group of their own here. Chapter 34:19. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. I think so too. They seem to be much more sincere than the outer hall disciples. Although she had only stayed here for a short period of time, she could feel the sincerity of the inner hall disciples in front of her. This was a completely different feeling from the outer hall disciples. Not only Bailey Hongzhuang, but Di Beichun and the others also felt the same. This kind of sincerity was something they could not feel at all in the outer hall. Is this also the difference between the inner hall disciples and the outer hall disciples? Xiaobai wondered. I don't know. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. But at least they don't have any malicious intent towards us. In their current situation, they were no threat to the inner hall disciples at all. The other side indeed had no need to deceive or harm them. Senior brother Run, senior sister Run, I feel that the atmosphere here is very different from the atmosphere among the outer hall disciples. Are you all good friends? Shangguan Yingying could not help but ask. She had always said what was on her mind, especially after seeing Rin Ziheng and the others joking with each other. She could not help but speak out her doubts. Listening to Shangguan Yingying's words, Rin Zimei could not help but laugh. Haha, your feelings are quite sharp. Hee hee. Shangguan Yingying smiled and touched her head. The disciples of the outer palace have always been on their own. They would fight for their own interests. However, everyone is a real family after entering the inner palace. Although there are still some conflicts on weekdays, everyone has a common enemy, which is Skeleton. In such a case, even the practitioners who fight to the death on weekdays will cooperate with each other in front of Skeleton, so the conflicts will be reduced correspondingly. In front of the foreign race, we are all partners. You may not be able to understand this feeling now, but you will gradually understand when you become an inner hall disciple. Although Penglai Palace is divided into 2 halls, the real center has always been the inner hall. I see. Shangguan Yingying nodded. In fact, she already understood what Rin Zimei meant. You all sit down and rest first. Rin Ziheng saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were still standing and could not help but speak out. Although the frequency of skeleton appearing here is not high, it does not mean that they will never appear. These guys are all mysterious and can come out of the ground at any time. Moreover, they are very strong. Therefore, we think of ways to rest during the day in order to fully accumulate strength. As Ren Ziheng's voice fell, everyone also made room for Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 sat down like everyone. The inner palace disciples were obviously not wary of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. After introducing the general situation to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, everyone began to talk about their own matters. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 remained silent. They just quietly listened to everyone's conversation and learned more information from it. This is really a magical place. I am looking forward to the arrival of this night. I wonder what the fighting skeleton looks like. Shangguan Yingying's eyes flashed with excitement and curiosity. She was obviously full of anticipation. Chapter 34:20. Looking at Xiren and Shangguan Yingying's expectant faces, Di Beichun couldn't help but say, I'm afraid it won't be a good experience to wait for the skeletons to appear. Everyone is now hoping that the skeletons won't appear at night. From the crowd's discussion, he heard most of them praying that the skeletons wouldn't appear at night. Ren Ziheng and the others weren't weak. Although the other disciples were injured, they hadn't completely lost their fighting strength. However, under such circumstances, almost everyone was praying that the skeletons wouldn't appear. It was obvious how terrifying the skeletons were. Bailey Hongzhuang agreed with Di Beichen's words. Although I haven't seen the skeletons in battle, just by thinking about these dead things, we'll always be at a disadvantage if we fight them. They had flesh and blood, but the skeletons couldn't feel any pain. In other words, their fighting strength would decrease after a battle, but the skeletons' fighting strength wouldn't decrease at all. Moreover, there were only so many Inner Palace disciples, but the number of skeletons was astonishing. After all, we haven't seen them before. This is a rare opportunity. After we return, the next time we come will be when we become Inner Palace disciples. Ziren smiled faintly, his face still filled with interest. People would always be curious about things they hadn't seen before, even if they weren't good people. Shangguan Yingying nodded. It wasn't easy to become an Inner Palace disciple. Even if they had a certain level of confidence in themselves, their cultivation had to be at least at the 7th level of the Purple Realm before they could participate in the advancement test. Just this point alone required them to work hard for a long time. After hearing Ziren's words, Ren Ziheng couldn't help but shake his head helplessly. I hope you don't see the skeletons, because after seeing them once, you won't want to see them a second time. If that happens, you might not even have the thought of becoming an Inner Palace disciple. That's not a good thing. The skeletons are actually that terrifying? Ziren was slightly stunned, his face filled with disbelief. In his opinion, the skeletons were just another kind of special monster beast. The only difference was that the process of dealing with them was a little more disgusting than dealing with monsters. Other than that, the experience should be similar. Not bad. Ren Ziheng nodded. That's the existence of nightmares. Only dawn can bring us a glimmer of hope. The night is always the most terrifying. At this point, Ren Ziheng's gaze deepened a little. Staying in this training ground, almost everyone had a different kind of expectation towards dawn. Nighttime was when the gates to hell opened. After seeing Ren Ziheng's serious expression, Ziren's curiosity lessened a little, because he could see that Ren Ziheng was trembling with disgust from the bottom of his heart when he mentioned the incubus. If one did not fear something to a certain extent, one would not reveal such emotions. He knew that Ren Ziheng was a cultivator at the 8th level of the Purple Realm, yet he was still so afraid of the skeleton. If they were in his shoes, the situation would be even worse. Chapter 34:21. After seeing the complicated look in Ziren's eyes, Ren Ziheng smiled again and said, "You don't have to be too nervous. Generally speaking, we won't have a skeleton army here. If you want to really see it, you have to wait until you become an Inner Hall disciple. At that time, I'm afraid you have to see it." Senior Brother Ren, have there been Outer Hall disciples coming here before? Di Beichan asked slowly. Since they had been tricked into coming here, it was likely that similar things had happened before. Perhaps there would be some daring masters who would deliberately come here to find out what was going on. Ren Ziheng nodded. There have been Outer Hall disciples coming here before. Although it is rare to see you being tricked like this, it has happened several times. This kind of thing can only happen to the disciples who have just joined the Penglai Palace. Other disciples have long known the difference between the two teleportation arrays and will not be tricked at all. However, there are not many people like you who have just arrived at the Penglai Palace and are hated by others. Listening to the laughter in Ren Ziheng's words, Di Beichun and the other three felt a burst of helplessness in their hearts. Ren Ziheng did not know the situation of the four of them in the Outer Hall. It could be assumed that everyone present in the Outer Hall did not make as much noise as them. Then did they leak the news later? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but ask. This news really brought too much shock to everyone. Once it was spread, it would be really explosive news. She didn't believe that no one had spread it for so long. No, Ren Ziheng shook his head. At this time, Ren Zimei said another sentence, but made the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three change. Because those guys were not lucky enough, they couldn't hold on until it was time to go back. so you four newcomers better pray that you don't encounter the skeleton army. Although we will find ways to protect you, many times we can't even take care of ourselves. You can understand by looking at everyone's injuries. Rinzume's face was solemn and serious. I'm not joking with you. In this place, the slightest carelessness can cost you your life. It's more tragic than any of the environments you've experienced before. Watching your family and friends fall and become a member of the skeleton army is something you can't imagine. Looking at Rinzume's serious expression, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's expressions turned serious. Rinzume's words were not meant to scare them. They were from the bottom of her heart. Just thinking about it was enough to know how terrible it felt to see one's family and friends turn into an army of skeletons. Zime, there's no need to say too much now. Run Ziheng waved his hand, indicating that Run Zime did not need to continue speaking. He turned to look at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three and said, "Curiosity killed the cat. So, you should stay here obediently. Do not run around, or else you will have to bear the consequences." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three nodded slightly. With just a few simple sentences, they already understood a lot of information. In short, this place was not a place that everyone liked to come to. Even if Rin Ziheng and the others understood this place very well, they were still filled with an indescribable sense of rejection and fear. Chapter 34:22. Before their strength reached a certain level, they would be asking for trouble if they went out rashly. This place is so terrifying. No cultivator has ever come out alive. No wonder Li Shengkai and the others were so confident. They must have thought that we would never be able to leave this place. Shangguan Yingying's expression was ugly. Her eyes were filled with anger. Those damn bastards wanted to use this opportunity to keep them here forever. Senior brother Ren and senior sister Ren made it sound so serious. I'm afraid this is really a place of no return. That's why Li Shengkai and the others are willing to give it a try. When Xiren said slowly, "Damn it." Shangguan Yingying clenched her fists. "As long as I can go back, I will definitely make those bastards pay. It's best if I throw them here to experience it." Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun looked at each other. Their hearts were heavy. According to Rin Ziheng and the others' description, this place was simply like hell. There's still half a month before the next teleportation array opens. Whether we can survive this half a month is also a problem. Bailey Hongzhuang said in a low voice. She noticed that Run Ziheng, who was at the 8th level of the Purple Realm, was also injured. She had fought with Gao Hanshun before, so she knew the strength of an 8th level Purple Realm cultivator. Ordinary monsters were no match for him, but these skeletons were able to injure Rin Ziheng. Just this point alone was enough to determine how powerful these skeletons were. Even though Rin Ziheng and the others kept saying that the frequency of skeletons appearing here was very low, she could see that everyone was not so sure. Most of them were praying. This proved that they were not absolutely safe here. It was just a little safer. If they were unlucky and encountered an army of skeletons, although there were many cultivators in front of them, they were afraid that they would not be able to fight. Otherwise, everyone would not be so nervous. Looking at the dignified appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang, Shangguan Yingying's face could not help but show a touch of worry. Now she gradually felt a sense of crisis, and her eyes could not help but look up at the sky. It was already afternoon, and soon the night would gradually fall. Come to think of it, when night fell, everyone had to be vigilant against the skeletons that could appear at any time. At this time, the man who had said that he was often disliked came to Di Beichun's side with a curious look on his face. "Newcomer, what's your name?" Di Beichun looked at the newcomer in surprise and said, "My name is Di Beichun." "Oh," the man nodded. "My name is Chu Jinfeng." "So it's senior brother Chu." Chu Jinfeng waved his hand and said, "You don't have to be so polite. By the way, I heard that there are 4 cultivators in the outer palace that Master Long has taken a fancy to. Do you know about them?" As Chu Jinfeng's voice fell, many of the inner palace disciples' eyes flashed with curiosity. "We also heard about this news. Master Long is experienced and knowledgeable. His vision is also very high. I'm afraid the people that Master Long has taken a fancy to are not simple." Chapter 34:23. That's true. Master Long's demon pet egg isn't that easy to obtain. Unless you perform extremely well in the outer palace, or you perform extremely well in the advancement assessment, it's only possible. Otherwise, you have to achieve a certain result in this training ground before you can obtain a demon pet egg. My achievement points have always been saved up in order to be able to exchange for a good demon pet egg. The 4 new guys actually got a demon pet egg as soon as they arrived. Speaking of which, it's really infuriating to compare people to death. Everyone couldn't help but sigh. Their eyes were filled with envy. Even the inner palace disciples couldn't help but be envious of the newcomers' treatment. I heard about it before. Originally, I wanted to see what kind of geniuses they were. However, they were always healing, so I couldn't see them. It's a pity. Chu Jinfeng sighed. Then, he looked at Di Baichen curiously. Newcomer, you should have heard about this matter, right? Listening to everyone's discussion about them, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3's expressions were somewhat complicated. They were already well-known figures in the outer palace. They didn't expect that many disciples in the inner palace would have heard of their existence. Di Baichen quietly glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2. The 3 of them shook their heads. It wasn't easy for them to not be ostracized here. If they spoke about this matter, wouldn't it cause trouble again? I heard about it. The commotion caused by this matter was extremely shocking. Di Baichen nodded. However, the 4 of them seemed to have been in seclusion in the house. There were no signs of them coming out. Although we were curious, we didn't have the chance to see them. Chu Jinfeng nodded. He wasn't surprised by Di Baichen's words at all. I heard that more than 200 disciples working together couldn't take the lives of the 4 of them. If this news spread, it would be a legendary existence. Not to mention the 100 or so disciples who died. The remaining few disciples must have hated them to a certain extent. It's normal for them to not be willing to come out. As long as it's not some guy who wants to see the world in chaos, they shouldn't choose to come out at this time. That's right. I heard that the surviving disciples of the outer hall experienced a decline in their cultivation. Do you know what happened to them? Chu Jinfeng sighed. I originally wanted to know more about the aftermath, but I was dragged here by Ren Ziheng and the others. I won't be able to return for a while. As outer hall disciples, you should know better. Seeing Chu Jinfeng's curious look, Ren Ziheng felt a little helpless. You don't have to care about him. This guy is obviously a man, but he likes to gossip so much. You make it sound like you're not curious. Chu Jinfeng curled his lips. Our Penglai Palace has not had such an interesting thing happen in a long time. Of course, we have to understand it. I feel that those fellows might become our inner palace disciples very soon. It's not a bad thing to get to know them in advance. A faint smile appeared on Run Zimei's face. Speaking of which, I'm also a little curious about this matter. If you know anything, please tell us. Chapter 34-24. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 looked at each other and felt a little awkward. They never thought that the inner palace disciples would be so curious about them. However, they did not know how Ren Ziheng and the others would react when they found out that the 4 cultivators they were interested in were right in front of them. It's said that those disciples can't recover their strength. They can only cultivate again, Di Baichen said slowly. Chu Jinfeng and the others sighed when they heard that. I've already guessed that this would happen. Since those 4 newcomers could cause such a huge commotion, they must have quite a temper. Being attacked by over 200 cultivators, anyone would probably die of frustration. If it were me, I wouldn't be able to help them recover their cultivation. These 4 newcomers seem to have quite the character. Huh. Ren Ziheng and the others also nodded. This kind of result was really not unexpected. As long as we can return safely this time, I'll go to the outer palace to meet those 4 newcomers. The outer palace is not suitable for them. It's better for them to come to the inner palace as soon as possible. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 smiled faintly. They only felt curiosity from Chu Jinfeng and the others' conversation. They did not feel any rejection or hostility. They only hoped that this would continue in the future. At this moment, Chu Jinfeng looked at the wound on his arm and could not help but curse. These skeletons are more than a little annoying. It's just a normal wound, but the recovery speed is so slow. Bailey Hongzhuang noticed the wound on Chu Jinfeng's left arm with her sharp eyes. Her eyes instantly widened as shock filled them. She saw that the wound was very deep. It reached the bone and revealed fresh red flesh. She could even vaguely see some white bones. Most importantly, there was a faint black color at the edge of the wound. According to her judgment, Chu Jinfeng had already used healing medicine. However, there were no signs of recovery after so long. It was very strange. "Senior Chu, can I see your wound?" Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but ask. Hearing this, Chu Jinfeng looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise. Obviously, he did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang to make such a request. "I feel like your wound is different from the ones we usually get. It hasn't healed after so long. Is there a problem?" Bailey Hongzhuang explained. "I didn't expect Junior Sister's eyes to be so sharp. You actually saw through the problem with a single glance." After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's explanation, Chu Jinfeng chuckled. This wound is indeed difficult to heal. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately walked to Chu Jinfeng's side and carefully looked at Chu Jinfeng's wound. Her discovery was even more obvious. That layer of faint black gas was still preventing the wound from healing. Even if no healing medicine was used, the wound would not show signs of healing after such a long time. From this, it could be seen that there was a problem. While Bailey Hongzhuang was paying attention to the wound, Deep Beichun, Wen Ziren, and Shangguan Yingying were also surrounding the wound. They were all curious about this problem. This wound was left by the skeletons? Bailey Hongzhuang asked. Chu Jinfeng nodded. That's right. This is also one of the disgusting methods of these skeletons. As long as one is injured by these skeletons, the edge of the wound will be contaminated with this kind of black gas and will not heal for a long time. Chapter 3425. Hearing Chu Jinfeng's words, the shock in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes deepened. I didn't think that the skeleton's attacks would have such a characteristic. No wonder everyone's injuries are so severe. Indeed, if it weren't for the fact that our injuries wouldn't heal, we wouldn't be in such a situation. A trace of helplessness appeared on Run Zimei's face. However, regarding this, the doctors of Penglai Palace have already tried their best, but in the end, there has been no improvement. I wonder if the disciples of the 100 Flowers Gate know how to solve this problem? Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. The 100 Flowers Gate's position on Penglai Island was extraordinary. It could be said that there were the most excellent pharmacists and doctors gathered there. Chu Jinfeng shook his head. This problem is also a headache for the 100 Flowers Gate. In fact, although the three factions normally work together, they are very united in dealing with the skeletons. The 100 Flowers Gate has always been researching how to deal with the existence of the black gas, but after so long, there has been no effect. I didn't think it would be so troublesome. Even the 100 Flowers Gate can't do anything. Shangguan Yingying frowned. This kind of situation that hindered the healing of injuries was too troublesome. Bailey Hongzhuang's mind was filled with thousands of thoughts. She said in a deep voice, "So, if a cultivator is seriously injured, the injury that can be treated is very likely to be blocked by the black qi and cannot be healed. In the end, they can only lose their life?" "How do you know?" Ren Ziheng was somewhat surprised. Normal people only knew that injuries were difficult to heal and didn't think of the various problems that would follow. He didn't think that Bailey Hongzhuang had thought of all of this. Seeing Ren Ziheng's curious expression, Di Beichen couldn't help but explain, Hongzhuang is a doctor, so she's more familiar with this situation. Following Di Beichen's words, everyone looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a trace of surprise. I really couldn't tell that Junior Bailey was a doctor. Chu Jinfeng looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise. After sizing her up, he smiled and said, "But after hearing what you said, I really feel that you do have the temperament of a doctor." Ren Ziheng and the others nodded. Generally speaking, most doctors would join the 100 Flowers Gate. Very few doctors would join Penglai Island. This was because doctors mainly developed their medical skills, not their strength. In this kind of situation, compared to a group of cultivators who only focused on cultivation, doctors would obviously be at a disadvantage in terms of combat strength. Therefore, the doctors that everyone saw on Penglai Island would never participate in battles. They didn't expect that a doctor would appear in their training team. It was really interesting. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, I've only dabbled in it a little. Hearing this, Ren Ziheng and the others also revealed a smile. That was more like it. If Bailey Hongzhuang really had amazing attainments in this area, then they would be truly shocked. You've tried many methods, but no matter what method you used, it was all useless for this injury. Bailey Hongzhuang slightly raised her eyebrows. Her eyes rippled with deep thought. This power of darkness was really strange. She had never come into contact with it before, so she couldn't make a judgment. Chapter 34:26. It's basically useless. Ren Ziheng saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was very concerned about the condition of the injury. He only thought that the doctor would have a certain curiosity about the situation that she had never seen before. He didn't mind introducing it to Bailey Hongzhuang. However, a kind of healing medicine made by the magic refining tower has some ways to treat this wound. At least the healing speed is a bit faster than ordinary healing medicine. Although it can't heal as quickly as ordinary wounds, it's much better than other healing medicines. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. The other three also looked at each other. If they didn't judge wrongly, the healing medicine that Ren Ziheng mentioned should be the healing medicine made by Bailey Hongzhuang. Previously, they had sold the prescription of this healing medicine to Steward Qin in exchange for the purple dragon emperor ginseng. Steward Qin had used this prescription to make a profit, but he did not expect to hear about this healing medicine from the mouths of others. Are you still in this situation after using the healing medicine? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but ask. She was very familiar with the effect of the healing medicine she made. Its healing speed would be much faster than ordinary healing medicine. However, Chu Jinfeng's healing speed was so slow. If he had already used her healing medicine, then the destructive power of this black gas was a bit too terrifying. That's not it. Chu Jinfeng waved his hand. That healing medicine is a hot seller in Penglai Palace. It's not easy to get on normal days. The healing medicine that I snatched before has been used up. Now I'm only using ordinary healing medicine. It's strange to say that it's all healing medicine. Even if the effect is better, it shouldn't be so obvious. However, the healing medicine of the magic refining tower is much better than ordinary healing medicine in restraining this black gas. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. Most of the ingredients of the healing medicine were similar. If the healing medicine she refined had an excellent effect, then some of the ingredients must have a suppressive effect on this black gas. In just a short moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's mind flashed with various elements, and she already had a certain idea in her heart. Speaking of which, I don't know how the Demon Training Tower came up with the prescription for this healing medicine. Now, both our Penglai Palace and the Crimson Moon sect are trying to buy it from them. However, this price is really expensive. Chu Jinfeng sighed. Ren Ziheng couldn't help but chuckle. Compared to us, the 100 Flowers Gate is even more anxious. The 100 Flower Gate had been trying to figure out a way to deal with the black gas, but they hadn't been able to come up with anything. Instead, the healing medicine from the demonic refining tower was effective. Previously, 100 Flowers Gate had been in an awkward position because of this matter. Haha, that's true. Everyone present could not help but laugh softly. The Devil Refining Tower was usually in existence that did not make a sound. However, no one dared to underestimate the strength of the Devil Refining Tower. However, the 100 Flowers Gate had always boasted of being powerful. Who would have thought that they would be slapped in the face by the Devil Refining Tower? Shangguan Ying and the others looked at each other. They really didn't think that the healing medicine that Bailey Hongzhuang had taken out would make the MO Refining Pagoda famous. It seems like this business deal, Steward Qin had made a big profit. Chapter 34:27. Senior Brother Chu, are you talking about the healing medicine that was promoted by the Magic Tower a few months ago? That's right. Chu Jinfeng nodded. It seems like you guys have heard of it before. However, that healing medicine is indeed in high demand on Penglai Island. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately took out the healing medicine from her bosom and said, "Coincidentally, I also have this healing medicine here. Since this healing medicine can help with everyone's injuries, then everyone should use it first." In the next second, Bailey Hongzhuang took out 20 portions of healing medicine from her Chinquan bag and gave one to each of the disciples present. She also felt that this healing medicine was very effective, so she made a lot of it and kept it with her. When going out to train, there might not be many serious injuries, but it was inevitable that there would be external injuries. When everyone saw Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, they could not help but be stunned. For a moment, they seemed to be unable to regain their senses. This scene was clearly out of Chu Jinfeng's expectations. He looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise and said, "Your healing medicine is the healing medicine from the magic tower?" Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. "It should be." When these words came out, Ren Ziheng and Ren Zimei could not help but look at each other. They were somewhat in disbelief. This new junior sister was a little too generous, wasn't she? Junior sister Bailey, this healing medicine is not cheap. Furthermore, there is a price, but there is no market. It is not easy to get a few portions, and you're giving it to us just like that? Chu Jinfeng could not help but be speechless. Although he had always been a reckless person, but he really could not do something like taking advantage of others. It was not only Chu Jinfeng, the other disciples present also did not take out any healing medicine. The new junior sister did not understand the market well enough and was so generous. If they took advantage of her like that, it would be very embarrassing, although they really needed the healing medicine now. That's right, the time is not early anymore. It will not be long before it is nighttime. Although this medicine can't heal everyone's injuries immediately, it's still good to be able to speed things up a little. It'll also be safer at night. Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at the crowd, and after seeing the complicated look on everyone's face, she understood what they were thinking and immediately began to explain. The four of us are newcomers to the Penglai Palace. We came here by accident. Fortunately, our senior brothers and sisters did not mind and told us a lot of things. I'm afraid we'll have to keep bothering you for the next 10 days. Compared to your friendliness, this is really nothing. The four of us aren't strong. If the skeleton army appears, not only will we not be able to help, we will also be a burden to everyone. So, senior brothers and sisters, don't worry about anything else. This is the only thing we can do right now. At this moment, Deep Beichen's voice sounded. After seeing the sincere eyes of Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichen, Ren Ziheng and others were silent for a moment. Then they all showed a smile on their faces. Junior brother and junior sister, I was wondering why I felt that you guys were very compatible when I saw you guys. You guys are really to my liking, haha. Chu Jinfeng laughed loudly. Since you guys said so, then I won't be polite. Don't worry. If you encounter danger, I will never ignore your safety. Chapter 34:28. Thank you, senior brother. Di Beichun cupped his hands and said. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were filled with a faint smile. The cost of making these healing medicines was not high. With everyone's help, her speed of making them was extremely fast. It didn't take much effort at all. At this moment, she took out the healing medicine. First, it was because everyone's attitude towards them was very friendly. Second, it was because they were now a team. If everyone's injuries could be healed, then once they encountered the skeleton army, at least their fighting strength would increase by a bit. Of course, there was another reason. She wanted to see how much better the healing medicine she made was than the general healing medicine. Bailey Hongzhuang had a certain curiosity about all the diseases that she had never seen before. She had a faint hunch that in the future, she would inevitably have an intersection with this skeleton army. If this injury could be reversed, it would be a good thing for them. Chu Jinfeng sprinkled the healing medicine on his injured arm. As the healing medicine was sprinkled, he quietly frowned, but he didn't say anything. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were always locked on Chu Jinfeng's wound. She found that after the healing medicine was sprinkled, the black gas around the wound quietly faded a little. Although it couldn't completely dissipate the black gas, the reduction of the black gas proved that the effect of inhibiting the healing of the wound was weakened. It was precisely because of this that the speed of recovery of the injury was faster. After Chu Jinfeng saw the change in the wound, the smile on his face couldn't help but widen a little. It is indeed this healing medicine. I didn't expect junior sister to have a lot of it. This thing is very popular in the Penglai Palace. Where did you buy it? As soon as these words came out, Everyone also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with some curiosity. Although the amount of healing medicine made by the magic refining tower was not small, there were also many practitioners on the Penglai Island who needed it. Their Penglai Palace could be considered one of the big families. However, everyone still had to rely on robbing. If they were late, they would have nothing left. Before I joined the Penglai Palace, I stayed in the magic tower for a while. At that time, the healing medicine was not as popular as it is now. The price was not high. I thought the effect was good, so I bought a lot. Bailey Hongzhuang said. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, everyone understood. So that's how it is. I've also heard that this healing medicine is relatively easy to buy in the magic refining tower. However, we simply don't have the time to go to the magic refining tower. What a pity. Chu Jinfeng sighed. Junior sister, you could be considered smart. Now, the price of healing medicine has increased by several times. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly and took it as a tacit agreement. After everyone used Bailey Hongzhuang's healing medicine, the recovery speed of the injury was faintly faster. At the same time, everyone was more friendly to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. This was how people got along with each other in this world. When someone took the initiative to show goodwill, everyone's relationship became closer and closer. Hongzhuang, I really didn't expect your healing medicine to have such a good effect. No wonder Steward Qin wanted to do business with you. Just from the previous transaction, he has already made a lot of money. Chapter 34:29. When Zyra nodded, Steward Qin is really making a fortune in silence. All the major powers are buying healing medicine from him. Just thinking about it, the amount is astonishing. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. Steward Qin has indeed made a lot of money through this healing medicine. But to me, these are not as important as the purple dragon emperor ginseng. Perhaps in the eyes of others, she had made a loss, but to her, this deal was definitely worth it. As long as Di Beichan could be safe and sound, not to mention a healing medicine formula. Even if it was anything else, she was willing to do it. Di Beichan turned his gaze away, his eyes full of gentleness and affection. He chuckled and said, "My wife has a deep affection for me. I can only repay it with my entire life." Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Di Beichan. That's right, you might not be able to repay it in your entire life. Isn't that just right? I wish to be with my wife for the rest of my life. When Zyron and Shangwan Yingying looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichan's sweet appearance and couldn't help but tremble. They just wanted to shake off all the goosebumps on their bodies. You two are already an old couple. Why are you still so mushy? Di Beichan glanced at Di Beichan and shook his head. You and Yingying are called an old couple. My wife and I are newlyweds. When the last ray of light disappeared and the curtain of night slowly fell, Ren Ziheng and the others all had a serious expression on their faces. Their attention had been focused on their surroundings and even their feet. Sometimes these skeleton armies will suddenly emerge from the ground, and if you're caught off guard, you will be pulled down directly. They might even break your legs, so everyone will be alert and pay attention to everything at night. After all, if you're not careful, you will lose your life. You have to be careful, Ren Ziheng reminded. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three also stood up and carefully observed their surroundings. Even though it was their first time spending the night here, after seeing how cautious everyone was, they naturally paid attention to their surroundings like everyone else. The night was deep, and the surroundings were quiet. Not a single sound could be heard. However, no one present relaxed because of this silence. They had stayed here for too long, and they never thought that they could get away with this temporary peace, because this moment of luck could lead to their death in the next moment. Master, I didn't expect everyone to be so nervous. Xiaohei sat on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder and could not help but look around. Just the atmosphere of the crowd made her feel a little heavy. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. These skeletons shouldn't be simple, and the way they appear is unpredictable, so it's only right to be on guard. When she thought of the skeleton army suddenly emerging from the ground, Bailey Hongzhuang felt her scalp go numb. This feeling of appearing and disappearing unpredictably was the most difficult to grasp. As long as they were not careful, it would not be easy for them to get up again. Is a situation of them suddenly emerging from the ground very similar to what we encountered in the desert world? I could not help but ask. Chapter 34:30. In that case, the benefits of our experience in the desert world are really not small. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. Her bright phoenix eyes twinkled with a little bit of starlight and looked at Di Beiqian with a smile. Indeed, every kind of experience in the desert world is very beneficial to us. Di Beiqian smiled faintly. Thinking back to the time when they were just in the desert world, they were often caught off guard by the sneak attacks of the demon beasts, but later on, their perception and judgment continued to improve. Even if the demon beasts were still elusive, they could already perceive them in advance. It was precisely because of this that the probability of being sneak attacked by the demon beasts continued to decrease, and the danger also continued to decrease. This kind of growth, thinking about it, will be a great help in this place where the skeletons were everywhere. Before, when they were in the desert world, they didn't feel that it would be particularly helpful, but according to the environment in front of them, it was really a great help. Many times, you think that the things you have mastered are not very useful, but you don't know when it may be of great use. In this kind of cautious situation, time undoubtedly passed very slowly, and being on guard against the possible appearance of the skeleton army at any time, it was inevitable that people would feel worried. And in this incomparably quiet time, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others seemed to be able to faintly hear the sound of fighting coming from the distance. At their level of cultivation, whether it was eyesight or hearing, they were far superior to ordinary people. Just by listening to the faint sound of fighting, they could imagine how fierce the battle in the distance was. Ren Ziheng and the others naturally also heard the rustling sound and couldn't help but frown tightly. The skeleton army has already appeared over there. Looking at the situation, I'm afraid it will be very difficult to deal with. Thinking of this, Ren Ziheng wanted to set out to help. Seeing Ren Ziheng's almost subconscious action, Ren Zimei couldn't help but say, "Big brother, don't think about helping. Our mission this time is to take care of the injured disciples. Now that everyone is injured, it is naturally the best that there is no skeleton army here for the time being. If you leave, if something happens here, how are you going to explain it?" Hearing this, Ren Ziheng sighed. In the end, he dismissed the thought in his heart. Not only Ren Ziheng, but Chu Jinfeng and the other disciples also had expressions of unwillingness on their faces. If not for the fact that they were injured and their fighting strength had greatly decreased, they would not have stayed here. However, if they went in their current state, they would only be giving up their lives. Right now, as long as I see these skeletons, I wish I could kill them all. Even after they died, they still come out to cause trouble. It's really disgusting, Chu Jinfeng said angrily. After staying here for a long time, he had developed an instinctive hatred for the skeleton army. Just by looking at them, he could not help but destroy them all. Everyone sighed deeply as they nodded their heads. Their eyes were filled with disgust towards the skeleton army. Who knew how many cultivators would be injured during this night? After this night, I'm afraid our team will grow a little stronger tomorrow. Ren Zimei sighed faintly. It was one thing for those inanimate creatures to die, but seeing her companions injured like this, she didn't feel too good. Chapter 34:31. The night passed slowly under everyone's vigilance, until a trace of light appeared on the horizon. Ren Ziheng and the others breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the ground in relief. Although they wanted to fight with the skeleton army wholeheartedly, the disciples here were all injured, so it was best if the skeleton army did not appear. It's daybreak, the skeleton army will not appear. You can also rest for a while, Ren Zimei said to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also sat on the ground. Although they did not engage in any battle for the whole night, they had been mentally tense for the whole night, so there was a certain amount of exhaustion. My God, every night has to be spent like this. It's really not an ordinary exhaustion. Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but sigh. Even if they were facing monsters, they didn't need to be so cautious to this extent. Since we've already come to this place, then let's stay here at ease. The earlier we understand, the more mentally prepared we will be when we become inner hall disciples in the future. Xiren said with a chuckle. Shangguan Yingying nodded. Even if nothing happened for the whole night, this feeling of being ready for battle made her feel a burst of helplessness. Even when they were chased by Gao Hanshun before, they were not so nervous. She was really curious about the situation when the skeleton army appeared. After everyone breathed a sigh of relief, they began to cultivate by themselves. In this place, as long as the sky was bright, it meant that there would be no more danger. Everyone could relax and cultivate. Because during the day, they would only encounter disciples of the same sect, and in such a place, there would be no conflict at all between disciples of the same sect. Bailey Hongzhuang checked Chu Jinfeng's wound again and found that the black qi on the wound had quietly dissipated a little. The wound that was originally deep enough to see the bone had healed a lot, but it would take 2 days to completely heal. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang also understood a little more in her heart. If it was an ordinary injury, as long as the healing medicine was used, the practitioner's movement would not be affected for a day. On the other hand, the injuries left behind by the skeleton needed 3 days to heal, and the gap between the two was apparent. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was extremely interested in the recovery of this injury, Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but smile and say, "Junior Bailey, it seems that you're also very interested in this medical skill." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "I've never seen such an injury before. I'm very curious." Anyone who knows medicine would be very curious when they see this kind of injury for the first time. Chu Jinfeng chuckled. "If Junior Sister Bailey can come up with a cure, that would be amazing. If I want to cure this injury, I have to find a way to break this black gas. However, I don't have any clues right now." Bailey Hongzhuang furrowed her brows as she pondered. This injury was just an ordinary injury. The only difference was the black gas. If she could find something to get rid of this black gas, then this problem would naturally be solved. However, this black gas seemed to be a very special existence. To get rid of this black gas, she really couldn't think of anything. Chapter 34-32. Bailey Hongzhuang only dabbled in medicine a little. It must be known that the existence of this black qi had made the 100 Flowers Gates, many alchemists and doctors, difficult to deal with. The pharmacists and doctors of the 100 Flowers Gate were all focused on this area. Even they had no other way. Bailey Hongzhuang was actually so serious in researching a way to break it. She was overestimating herself. However, seeing Bailey Hongzhuang so serious in her thoughts, Chu Jinfeng couldn't bear to discourage her. Since Bailey Hongzhuang was so interested in the black gas, he would let her slowly research it. After all, they had nothing else to do here. Of course, if Chu Jinfeng knew that the healing medicine that he highly praised was made by Bailey Hongzhuang in front of him, he would never have such thoughts again. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the black gas lingering around the wound and thought of a way to break it. All kinds of medicinal ingredients flashed through her mind, but she dismissed them in the end. However, she had a few guesses in her mind. Di Baichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's thoughtful expression and couldn't help but ask, "Wife, have you thought of a way to break this black gas?" Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head, "No. Even now, I still don't understand the black gas well enough. As for a way to break it, I don't even know." Even though she was very confident in her medical skills, but the entire Penglai Island had so many pharmacists and doctors who couldn't think of a solution. If she could think of a solution in such a short time, it would be too inconceivable. She didn't understand the true strength of the 100 Flowers Gate, but as a famous power, they must have real strength. She definitely wouldn't underestimate them. Since they couldn't think of a way to break it after so long, it proved that it was extremely difficult. However, your medicine seems to have some special suppressive effect on the black gas. Di Baichen asked. Just this point alone made Bailey Hongzhuang better than those doctors and pharmacists. That's right. That's why I have some guesses in my mind. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. However, if my judgment is correct, even if my conjectures can suppress the black gas to a certain extent, it's still impossible to completely eliminate it. She had already carefully studied the characteristics of her healing medicine. Although it had some suppressive effects, it could only suppress it. It could be said that it treated the symptoms, but not the root cause. If she wanted to truly remove this black gas, it was obvious that she still couldn't find the thing that could truly counter it. Is it possible that there is no way to break this black gas? Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but ask. Nowadays, she was very interested in the art of poison. Medicine and poison were inseparable. Therefore, when Bailey Hongzhuang mentioned this point, she also seemed to be very interested. Hearing his words, Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head and said in a deep voice, "Everything in the world has its own antidote, just as no matter what kind of poison it is, you can find the antidote. The problem is whether you can find the antidote or not. Since this black gas exists, it means that there must be something that counters this black gas. However, there are millions of things in the world. Finding this thing isn't easy." Every time she encountered a new illness, Bailey Hongzhuang would spend a lot of time thinking about it. It was all for the sake of finding this substance. Chapter 34-33. Only by understanding enough medicinal herbs would one be able to find the corresponding substance in the shortest time possible. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had never seen this black gas before. She didn't even understand its characteristics, let alone something that countered it. The only thing she could do now was to understand it in advance. If she could make some progress, it would be for the best. That way, they would have more ways to deal with it when they came here to train as inner disciples. So that's how it is. Shangguan Yingying's face flashed with understanding. I feel that the world of medicine is also very magical. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. There are many things that exist in this world that are very magical. Back then, I was very interested in this mutual generation and restraint, so I put a lot of effort into my medical skills. Just as Ren Ziheng had expected, a few more cultivators who were seriously injured came over one after another today. Just by looking at the injured cultivators, Bailey Hongzhuang could feel how tragic the battle last night was. The seriously injured cultivators even had their legs broken. Most importantly, from the part of the wound, it seemed that they were torn apart. Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but frown after seeing this scene. The feeling of having one's leg broken was enough to make her scalp tingle. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun couldn't help but look at each other. It seems that this skeleton is very strong. I'm afraid that he was caught off guard and was very strong. Before the cultivator could react, his leg had already been broken. Di Beichun said in a deep voice. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She finally understood why Ren Ziheng and the others were so careful last night. Being caught off guard was probably the most difficult thing to accept. What a terrible injury. Shangguan Yingying looked at the injuries and couldn't help but shiver. Although they would also get injured in battle, but compared to this kind of injury, the injuries left by swords and sabers were obviously much easier to accept. Ren Ziheng and the rest immediately went to help the injured cultivators over. Everyone's expression revealed some helplessness and heaviness. However, it was fortunate that their lives were not harmed. As long as they consumed some medicinal pills that could regenerate broken bones, they would still be able to recover. However, they would need to recuperate for quite some time after returning this time. The cultivator with the broken leg seemed to be used to this. He even had a smile on his face. Ren Ziheng, I didn't expect us to meet so soon. Ren Ziheng looked at the man helplessly. Jing Tianlang, it seems that you were very unlucky last night. Don't mention it. Jing Tianlang waved his hand, his face full of annoyance. Those skeletons are getting more and more despicable. Their sneak attacks are hard to guard against. I'm really unlucky this time. Since you're already here, you should rest well. Ren Ziheng sighed. Looking at your situation, I'm afraid that you'll need to recuperate for at least a month when we return this time. That depends on the situation. You guys were pretty lucky last night. You didn't encounter those annoying guys. Jing Tianlang looked at the people around him who were safe and sound and smiled. Chapter 34-34. Jing Tianlang sat down at the side as if he was very familiar with the disciples around him. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three could not help but look at each other. Compared to the outer palace disciples who did not know each other, the inner palace disciples were obviously much more familiar with each other and clearly knew each other. Jing Tianlang quickly noticed the unfamiliar faces of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, and his eyes couldn't help but show a hint of surprise. When did we add a few new disciples to the inner hall? Then why are they staying here? Why don't they go to the front? The four of them are new Outer Palace disciples. They were tricked by someone and went to the wrong teleportation formation and accidentally came here. Chu Jinfeng explained with a smile. Every time he thought about how Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were tricked by someone, he found it funny. Hearing Chu Jinfeng's words, Jing Tianlang could not help but be stunned. Outer Palace disciples? Ren Zimei nodded. These four are hotheads. I'm afraid they don't know the twists and turns of the Outer Palace. Someone deliberately tricked them, and they came here. Now, they can't leave and can only stay here. As soon as she said that, Jing Tianlang could not help but laugh. Ha! You four newcomers are quite interesting. When we get back, we must teach those people who tricked you a lesson. They clearly want you to die here. Any cultivator who had stayed in the Outer Palace for a period of time would know how terrifying the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples were. If one was not strong enough, only death would await them. However, those people deliberately tricked Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three to come here. It was obvious that they wanted to kill them. As long as we go back, those people will definitely have a hard time, Deep Bachin slowly said as his deep eyes flickered with a sharp light. He did not need to think to know that those people were determined that they would not be able to return alive. When they return alive, he would personally send them to hell. As for Li Shankai, the little bit of friendship they had before was completely gone after this incident. Since they wanted to kill them, only one of them could survive. Hearing the murderous intent in Di Beichen's words, Jing Tianlang was a little surprised. He did not expect this new disciple to be so confident. It was as if he wanted to kill them when they returned. With this kind of temperament, if he had the strength, it would be confidence. If he did not have enough strength, it would be arrogance. However, Jing Tianlang took a deep look at Di Beichen. He felt that Di Beichen was showing confidence. I admire such a vengeful personality. I hope you can return alive and give them a surprise. We will. Di Beichen. Although this training ground was full of danger, he never thought that they would lose their lives here. Seeing Di Beichen's confidence, Jing Tianlang raised his eyebrows and looked at Ren Ziheng and the others thoughtfully. Ren Ziheng and the others also smiled faintly. They could all see that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were not ordinary people. As long as they were geniuses, they would always have some pride. In the next few days, everyone's luck was extremely good. They passed the night peacefully and did not encounter the skeleton army. Chapter 34-35. With the continuous addition of injured disciples, the team of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others was also constantly growing. From the initial 20 people, it had become a team of 40 people. Some of the cultivators who were not seriously injured left directly after recuperating here for a few days. Obviously, they did not intend to wait for the teleportation formation to open this time. As for some of the more seriously injured cultivators, they could only stay here and wait to go back and recuperate. During this process, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also understood that the disciples of the inner hall of Penglai Palace had their own arrangements before each experiential learning. This time, it happened to be Ren Ziheng and Ren Zimei's turn to take care of the injured disciples. Next time, it will be other cultivators' turn. Because the injured disciples' combat power was weaker, if there was no one to protect them, once they encountered the skeleton army, only death would await them. The number of cultivators in the inner hall was not many. Compared to the skeleton army here, it was already very small. If there were still such a large number of casualties, then it would not be long before there would not be many cultivators left in the inner hall of Penglai Palace. Among these injured cultivators, there were also some people who were seriously injured. After seeing these seriously injured cultivators, Bailey Hongzhuang went to help without saying a word. If it was a normal day, the injuries of others had nothing to do with her at all. Bailey Hongzhuang also had no intention to help. However, now everyone was fighting against the skeleton army that threatened the Shengxian continent. In this regard, they should have been allies. What's more, after seeing the inner hall disciples helping each other, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were also deeply affected by this atmosphere. As an individual, the influence of this atmosphere was often huge. In such an atmosphere, everyone was willing to think for each other. Everyone originally had some doubts about Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills, but after seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's skillful technique, everyone's heart also surged with some feelings of appreciation. They were often injured, so they had a certain understanding of how to deal with injuries. However, it was much more convenient for Bailey Hongzhuang to deal with it. During this process, Bailey Hongzhuang did not hesitate to use her healing medicine. Therefore, everyone accepted Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three from the bottom of their hearts. They only hoped that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three could pass the advancement test as soon as possible and become a member of their team. Junior brother D, your luck is really not bad. Junior sister Bailey has already been deceived by you at such a young age. If you hadn't acted early, I can guarantee that you would definitely have many love rivals in the inner palace. Chu Jinfeng patted Di Beichen's shoulder. His eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang, who was treating his injuries not far away. Not only was Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance outstanding, but she was also very easy to get along with. She did not have the affectation of an ordinary woman. She was simply every man's dream lover. According to their judgment, during this period of time, Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills were also very outstanding. At the very least, she was not inferior to the doctors they usually see. Hearing Chu Jinfeng's words, Di Beichen could not help but smile. I won't hide it from senior brother Chu. Actually, I also think that my luck is very good. To be able to meet Bailey Hongzhuang was the luckiest thing in his life. Chapter 34-36. Looking at Di Beichen's expression, Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but say helplessly, "You are really not modest at all. For this kind of thing, if I'm modest, wouldn't it be hypocritical?" Di Beichen grinned. After these days of getting along, he and Chu Jinfeng had become familiar with each other. He found that Chu Jinfeng himself was also a person who liked to joke very much, but he was broad-minded, far from an ordinary narrow-minded person, so he didn't care about jokes at all. Chu Jinfeng nodded. That's also true. Recently, many people have been envious of your good fortune. What's the use of envying me? Di Beichen raised his eyebrows. There's only one Bailey Hongzhuang in the world, and she's already my wife. Even if you wait until the next life, you won't have a chance. Di Beichen swung Chu Jinfeng's hand away from his neck, and then patted Chu Jinfeng's shoulder. Senior Chu, you are not young anymore. Instead of envying me, you might as well take good care of this Taoist companion, so that you don't have to idle around all day. Seeing Di Beichen preaching to him in a serious manner, Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but be surprised. Yo, you brat, do you know that I am your senior? In terms of time spent in Penglai Palace, you are naturally my senior, but in terms of feelings, I am your senior. Di Beichen chuckled. Okay, I can see that you are deliberately showing off. You might as well go away, so as not to make others jealous. Chu Jinfeng directly pushed Di Beichen aside. He was much older than Di Beichen. He didn't expect to be laughed at by Di Beichen for being alone. He was really bitter in his heart. After seeing Chu Jinfeng's sad appearance, when Ziren couldn't help but come over and said with a smile, Senior brother Chu, I think you don't need to feel empty and lonely. This senior sister run is not bad. If you work harder, won't you have a beauty in your arms in the future? Recently, he found that Chu Jinfeng and Ren Zimei had a lot of interaction between them. According to his judgment, they were a couple, and they were just short of breaking the window paper. Listening to Ziren's words, Chu Jinfeng raised his eyebrows and said, You think I have hope? Ziren nodded. Of course, I can see it at a glance. Senior Chu, you have to work harder and strike the iron while it's hot. If you delay it for too long, the final result will be uncertain. I thought I had hope, but I haven't succeeded. Chu Jinfeng spread out his hands. If he could succeed, he would have succeeded a long time ago. Until now, he hadn't succeeded. God knows what the problem was. Shang Guanying saw that Ziren didn't want to chat with Chu Jinfeng and actually came up with a bad idea. She couldn't help but pinch Ziren's waist. Ziren, don't come up with random ideas here. I'm helping senior brother Chu. How can you say that I'm giving advice? When Ziren said seriously, Junior sister, let me listen to Ziren's idea first. If it succeeds, I will treat you to a meal after we go out. Chu Jinfeng smiled brightly. Seeing this, Shang Guanying was helpless. Sure enough, when two men got together, nothing good would happen. Compare to Di Baichun, when Ziren liked to come up with random ideas. Chapter 34-37. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw that Shangguan Yingying suddenly came to her side, she couldn't help but laugh and tease. Yingying, what's wrong? Did Ziren make you angry again? I don't have anything to be angry about. I'm just afraid that he will come up with bad ideas and make senior sister unhappy. Shangguan Yingying's face showed a touch of helplessness. She had a very good impression of senior sister Rin. Since they came here, senior brother Rin and senior sister Rin were very kind to them. Now, she didn't know what bad ideas Ziren and Chu Jinfeng were coming up with. She now found that Chu Jinfeng and Ziren were the same kind of people. How is it related to senior sister Rin again? Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. She knew that Chu Jinfeng was very close to Di Baichun and Ziren recently. But it was fine if the three of them were chatting, but now it was related to senior sister Rin. Isn't it because Shangguan Yingying whispered the reason to Bailey Hongzhuang? After listening to all this, Bailey Hongzhuang showed a look of understanding. Since senior brother Chu has such thoughts, if Ziren can help to fulfill the beauty of the two, this is also a good thing. If it's a good way to pursue, I naturally agree. But I look at Ziren, and I'm afraid that he will come up with bad ideas. If it doesn't succeed, it will destroy the relationship between senior sister Ren and senior brother Chu. Wouldn't that be terrible? Shangguan Yingying felt a wave of helplessness. She had been with Ziren for so long, so she understood Ziren's bad ideas very well. It was fine if he made her angry, but if he made senior sister Ren angry, then it would be troublesome. Don't worry, Ziren should have a sense of propriety. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. Ziren usually deliberately makes you angry. He won't come up with bad ideas on other people's matters. After being together for so long, she also understood that Ziren liked to deliberately tease Shangguan Yingying, so he deliberately messed up some things for fun. However, when it came to other people's affairs, Ziren was still very steady. I hope so. Shangguan Yingying pursed her lips, obviously not believing Ziren. When will our Ziren be as steady as Baichun? I'm just afraid that if Ziren really becomes like that, you won't be used to it. I won't. Bailey Hongzhuang turned around and saw Ziren and Chu Jinfeng engaged in a heated discussion. Chu Jinfeng's face revealed a rare hint of embarrassment. Later, he even pulled Di Baichun over. In the blink of an eye, 13 out of 15 days had passed. In 2 days, everyone could return to Penglai Palace through the transmission array. Perhaps they thought that after returning to Penglai Palace, everyone could rest at ease. Everyone was in a very good mood, and the atmosphere became more and more cheerful. With less scheming and scheming, even Bailey Hongzhuang and the others felt very comfortable getting along with each other. Night fell again. Bailey Hongzhuang and others were now very familiar with observing the situation around them. For 13 days in a row, they spent their nights like this, so now they had become accustomed to this situation. Chapter 34-38. Time passed by little. More than 40 cultivators in the inner hall gathered together. Every time they passed peacefully, everyone felt happy from the bottom of their hearts. Their injured team really couldn't afford any more trouble. They just wanted to go back to Penglai Palace to recuperate. They would come back here to participate in the battle after their injuries were completely healed. In my opinion, the skeleton army should not appear tonight. After today, we can go back and rest. This time, I will recuperate for a while after I go back. I'm not far from breaking through. I plan to go to the cultivation area to take the opportunity to break through this bottleneck and then come back. Haha. In that case, I have to congratulate you in advance. Everyone lowered their voices and chatted. From time to time, they would pay attention to their surroundings. Compared to the tension from a few days ago, everyone had relaxed a little in these 2 days. They only felt that the skeleton army would not appear. However, after seeing such a calm scene, Bailey Hongzhuang frowned quietly. For some reason, she had a faint, ominous premonition in her heart. Baichun, I keep feeling that something is not right tonight. Bailey Hongzhuang turned her head to look at Di Baichun. Her delicate, jade-like face was a little complicated. She carefully observed the surroundings and found that there was nothing special. But for some reason, the ominous premonition in her heart could not dissipate. Di Beichen's eyes also deepened a little. Actually, I also have a feeling of uneasiness. It seems that something is going to happen. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other. The feeling in their hearts could not help but become stronger. As far as the current situation was concerned, no one felt that there was any problem. But this was their intuition. Although this intuition could not be supported by any reason, it was often unexpectedly accurate. Thinking back to when they were training in the desert world, they often had this feeling. Every time they were ambushed, they would almost always have this kind of intuition. There was no evidence to support them, but the final result every time told them that their judgment was not wrong. Looks like something might happen tonight. Bailey Hongzhuang narrowed her eyes. They had been safe and sound for the past 10 days. They were not far from leaving this place. She did not expect that tonight might give them a surprise. Be prepared and be extra careful, Di Beichen said in a deep voice. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and told Shangwan Yingying and Wen Ziren their thoughts. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Shangwan Yingying and Wen Ziren were also very surprised. How did you know? It's just a hunch. I can't guarantee that it's completely accurate, but it's always good to be more careful. Ziren nodded. There was enough trust and tacit understanding between them. There was no need for any explanation, and they would choose to believe him. Senior Chu, something might be wrong tonight. Everyone must not be careless. Di Beichen looked at Chu Jinfeng and said with a serious expression. Even though he knew that the possibility of everyone believing him was very small, in the face of danger, he still had to remind everyone. Chu Jinfeng was slightly stunned. How did you know? This is my hunch, Di Beichen said. Chapter 34-39. Di Beichen had only just arrived at this training ground. He had never even seen the skeleton army before. Yet, he had a premonition. This was too unbelievable. Looking at Chu Jinfeng's incredulous expression, Di Beichen couldn't help but explain, whether this premonition is accurate or not, it's always good for everyone to be more careful. If my premonition is wrong, then it's undoubtedly better to have a safe night. Hearing this, Chu Jinfeng nodded. You're right. It's always good to be careful. The next moment, Chu Jinfeng directly said to Ren Ziheng and the others, I think there's something unusual tonight. Everyone should be alert and be more careful. He didn't mention Di Beichen. After all, Di Beichen was still a newcomer. He was afraid that no one would believe him. On the contrary, if he said it, everyone would undoubtedly believe him. In the end, even if nothing really happened, he only needed to make a joke to cover up this matter. Seeing that Chu Jinfeng chose to believe him, Di Beichen's eyes brightened. He could understand the deeper meaning of Chu Jinfeng's choice. Chu Jinfeng, I rarely hear that you have a premonition. Ren Zimei couldn't help but chuckle. If your premonition is wrong, then you have to treat everyone to a meal. No problem. Chu Jinfeng laughed. Then what if my premonition is right? Ren Zimei was slightly stunned. If your premonition is right, then everyone will thank you. Chu Jinfeng shook his head and joked, that won't do. If my premonition is right, then let me treat you to a meal. How about it? As Chu Jinfeng's voice fell, everyone present couldn't help but sigh. Everyone knew about the unclear relationship between Chu Jinfeng and Ren Zimei, but they didn't expect Chu Jinfeng to be so straightforward at this time. However, if these two could really become a couple, everyone would be happy to see it. Ren Zimei looked at Chu Jinfeng in surprise. She, who had always been straightforward, suddenly stopped at this moment. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Okay, I promise you. Ren Zimei raised her chin and said, it's a deal. Ren Ziheng shook his head when he saw this scene. Chu Jinfeng usually had a sloppy personality, but he also knew that this guy was serious about what he said at this moment. Since the bet has been agreed upon, let's pay attention to our surroundings. It's rare for Chu Jinfeng to have such intuition. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone put away their joking expressions and carefully looked around. They knew very well that Chu Jinfeng wanted to pursue Ren Zimei, but he would not find such a reason to pursue her. Since he said so, perhaps he really did have some intuition. Junior Brother D, I'm betting everything on your intuition, Chu Jinfeng said in a low voice. Di Bei-chan smiled faintly. Brother Chu, I don't know whether I should hope that my intuition is accurate or that he is inaccurate. Chu Jinfeng's expression was somewhat complicated. In this case, it would be best if the skeleton army did not appear. However, if that happened, they would lose the bet. Chapter 3440. As soon as the crowd finished speaking, they suddenly heard a series of rustling sounds. Hearing this sound, Ren Ziheng and the others could not help but change their expressions because they were not unfamiliar with this sound at all. Every time the skeleton army appeared, it would sound like this. Chu Jinfeng, I didn't expect your intuition to be so accurate. Jing Tianlang could not help but say. Chu Jinfeng's face also flashed with a strong sense of surprise. Although he chose to believe Di Bei-chan, he did not believe that Di Bei-chan's intuition was accurate from the bottom of his heart. He just regarded Di Bei-chan as a brother, so he did not want to disrespect Di Bei-chan. However, all of this was actually accurate. At this moment, Chu Jinfeng felt a little unbelievable. Di Bei-chan, a newcomer who had never seen a skeleton army, actually had such an intuition. Rin Zimei also looked at Chu Jinfeng in surprise and said, Chu Jinfeng, although I have no interest in eating with you, but seeing that your hunch is very accurate, I will eat with you. But first of all, you have to survive. Hearing this, Chu Jinfeng laughed loudly. Don't worry, we will definitely eat this meal. The moment the rustling sound was heard, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others felt the ground soften. Then, skeleton arms stretched out from the ground, as if they wanted to directly break everyone's feet. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately rushed out. Fortunately, they were already mentally prepared. The rustling sound was extremely soft. If they had not been paying attention before, just a few words of conversation would have been enough to cover this sound. However, everyone was already prepared, so no one was hit. Damn it, this skeleton army has now set foot in our place. It is probably impossible to find a safe place here in the future. There is no safe place in this training ground. These disgusting guys are everywhere like cockroaches. They are extremely disgusting. Compared to the people who already knew about it, the eyes of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were completely attracted by the skeletons that suddenly appeared from the ground. Even if they had heard about the appearance of the skeletons before, now that they had seen it with their own eyes, they still felt an unspeakable sense of shock. In their line of sight, the white skeletons with a little bit of black gas and 2 red flames flashed in their eyes. At this moment, they were constantly attacking everyone. Skeletons kept crawling out from the ground, like corpses crawling out a mass grave. They could even hear the sound of bones moving, which was really shocking under the moonlight. These monsters look really scary. Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with shock. A skeleton that could move had really refreshed her understanding of it. Now that she saw it with her own eyes, she only felt that all of this was like a nightmare. It made her hair stand on end. Even though the 4 of them were filled with indescribable shock, their speed was very fast. Their sharp swords had already appeared in their hands, and without hesitation, they attacked the attacking skeleton. Chapter 3441. Chu Jinfeng reminded Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 as he fought with the skeleton army. These ordinary skeletons aren't strong, but they're like locusts. Their numbers are shocking and they can take a beating, so we have to destroy their spiritual fire as quickly as possible. After the skeleton army appears, a skeleton general might appear. Once the general appears, retreat immediately and leave it to us. Do you understand? At this moment, Chu Jinfeng had already put away his usual, joking expression. His handsome face was full of solemnity and seriousness. The appearance of this skeleton army was never a joke. Although there were many cultivators in their team, most of them were injured. If they were not careful, they could lose their lives. Understood. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 responded in unison. Ding, ding, ding. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the skeleton that was charging towards her. Her ink-black phoenix eyes flashed with a cold and deep light. She attacked with the colored glaze sword in her hand without hesitation. However, after exchanging blows with the skeleton, Her eyes could not help but flash with a hint of surprise because the strength of the skeleton had exceeded her expectations. It had just reached the purple realm, but its strength was comparable to a third or fourth level purple realm cultivator. If it was a high-level skeleton, its strength would be even more terrifying. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but think of Jing Tianlong's leg injury. He must have been caught off guard and broken his leg with such a strong force. Bailey Hongzhuang subconsciously looked in Jing Tianlong's direction. He had already broken a leg, so it was extremely inconvenient for him to fight now. She then realized that Ren Ziheng was carrying Jing Tianlang on his back. There were other cultivators around them, forming a small circle to deal with the skeletons that appeared around them. Although Jing Tianlang was injured, he and Ren Ziheng worked together to fight the skeletons. Obviously, the inner palace disciples were used to helping each other. There was a certain level of tacit understanding between them. Bailey Hongzhuang held the colored glaze sword in her hand and channeled her primary energy into it. After receiving Chu Jinfeng's reminder, she no longer wasted time fighting the skeleton. Instead, she attacked the skeleton's head directly. As long as the flame was dealt with, the skeleton would fall down and never stand up again. During the fight, she also realized that no matter if the skeleton's arm or leg was broken, it would quickly recover and connect the bones again. Such an eerie and strange scene was really creepy. Most importantly, Bailey Hongzhuang realized that the area of the ground was constantly expanding. Although they had dealt with many skeletons, the number of skeletons that appeared from the ground seemed to be endless. Moreover, the numbers seemed to be increasing. Oh my God, how many skeletons are coming? Ziren was astonished when he saw the number of skeletons that were continuously emerging from the ground. And skeletons' number was still increasing. Chapter 3442. More and more. When Ziren couldn't help but frown. To what extent? Although Ren Ziheng and others also introduced a lot of things about the skeleton army to them before, everyone just mentioned it briefly and didn't tell them too much in detail. According to his judgment, he was afraid that Ren Ziheng and others were worried that they would be afraid of the skeleton army after knowing too much and would not be willing to join the inner hall in the future. Everyone calls these guys locusts. Can you imagine what kind of realm it is? Ren Ziheng said aloud. Hearing this, Ziren's eyes flashed with a touch of fear. He already knew that the number of the skeleton army would be far beyond his imagination. Newcomers, you have to save some physical strength. The skeleton army will not leave until dawn, so you have to be prepared for a long-term battle. Jing Tianlang reminded. As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three couldn't help but look at each other. They also understood the general situation in their hearts. So far, it had only been a few minutes, but there were already so many skeletons in the army. Now, it was just nightfall, and there were still a few hours before dawn. Just thinking about this number, it was already a huge existence. Oh my God, there are so many skeletons. No wonder they are called locusts. Shangguan Yingying exclaimed out loud. She still felt a little incredulous. The moonlight sprinkled on the ground, adding a touch of silver to the black ground. The ground where Bailey Hongzhuang and others were before seemed to have turned into a swamp. Skeletons crawled out of it one after another. The eerie white bones had a bit of a terrifying aura, and the fiery red spiritual fire was even more indescribably strange. The sound of bones cracking could be heard from the skeletons. Some of the skeletons even had their legs broken by the other skeletons while they were walking. However, these skeletons didn't feel any pain at all. They just numbly reattached the bones to their bodies. Sometimes they even reattached the bones to their bodies, but these skeletons were unaware of it. The whole land seemed to have sunk into a gloomy and cold atmosphere. The huge number of skeletons kept increasing. The 40 disciples of Penglai Palace looked weak among the hundreds and thousands of skeletons. It was a good thing that everyone's cultivation was very strong. Dazzling origin energy burst out continuously, and the skeleton quickly fell down. For now, these skeletons did not pose much of a threat to everyone. However, the solemn expression on everyone's faces did not change. This was because they knew that this was only a temporary respite. As the battle dragged on, the number of skeletons would increase, and once their strength weakened, the chances of them getting injured would greatly increase. Master, isn't the number of skeletons a little too terrifying? Xiao Hei's eyes were filled with astonishment. Just how many skeletons are there here? Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. She was also very surprised by this. This place should be a gathering place for the undead. Perhaps it used to be a mass grave. Such an existence is really strange. I find it hard to imagine how such a place could exist. Chapter 3443. According to what Ren Ziheng and the others had said, the number of skeletons they had dealt with every day was not small. But even under such circumstances, there were still so many skeletons. This was a little too shocking. The world is so big, nothing is too strange. Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang had their backs against each other as they dealt with the skeletons that were constantly rushing towards them. These eerie white skeletons, coupled with their strange appearance and faint sinister laughter, made them want to bury all of these guys in the ground for a long time. I've really learned something this time. Even after death, they can still maintain such a fighting strength. This is enough to prove that these skeletons were very strong when they were alive. Bailey Hongzhuang narrowed her phoenix eyes. When she thought of the underlying reason, she felt very scared. Experts were indeed experts. Even after death, they still had such a terrifying fighting strength. With so many experts, I really don't understand why they would die in a place like this. Di Beichen also had some doubts in his heart. Generally, experts who had reached this level of cultivation would die in a grand manner. Many experts would choose to pass on their skills before they died. This was the origin of the ancient ruins. Of course, some experts who were killed directly did not have the time to prepare all of this. However, the strength of the skeletons here was so strong that it could be assumed that none of them were simple. It was really shocking that all of them had died here. There must be a reason. It's just that we haven't come into contact with that level yet. Bailey Hongzhuang's willowy eyebrows twitched slightly. There was still a trace of pondering between her eyebrows. The Shengxian continent of 1,000 years ago had obviously changed a lot compared to 1,000 years later. However, she had not found any accurate records in the books before. Thinking about it, the appearance of these skeletons must have been in the middle of the years. At least, she did not have any contact with these skeletons at that time. Di Beichen nodded slightly. We will know one day. While Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were talking, the number of skeletons under their feet was constantly increasing. Compared to the efficiency of the other disciples, their efficiency in dealing with the skeletons was not slow. Bai Shi, Xiao Hei, and Xiao Bai did not make a move because Bailey Hongzhuang had realized that it was useless no matter how many skeletons they killed. Their real goal was to persevere and fight until dawn. This was going to be a protracted battle because the number of skeletons was not something they could deal with in a short period of time. Xiao Hei, Xiao Bai, and White Lion were saving some energy now. When the time came, they would have a chance to catch their breaths. The three newly born little fellows were also staying in the Chaos Ring. Although they really wanted to help their master in battle, their current strength was still a little too weak. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had prepared a lot of food to feed the three newly born contracted beasts. Because the three contracted beasts' ranks were already very high, their cultivation was not low when they were born. However, it would still take some time to nurture them to the point where they could fight side by side with Di Beichen and the others. It was because the higher the rank of a contracted beast, the higher the starting point. Therefore, the time needed to feed them would be reduced by a lot. This was why countless experts would scramble for high-ranked contracted beasts. In comparison, Bai Shi was a special existence. Chapter 3444. Bailey Hongzhuang had also asked White Lion about this. Perhaps it was because White Lion's growth had countless possibilities, so it needed to rely on its own strength to cultivate step by step. It was precisely because of this that there were very few Beast Kings. If they did not have good luck during their growth process, then they might be in danger when they were very weak. Although it could exude the aura of a Beast King and make ordinary monsters not dare to approach, it could be said that any problem could happen during its growth process, so everything was uncertain. Ren Ziheng and the others were originally very worried that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three would not be able to deal with these skeletons that suddenly appeared because these skeletons were not only numerous, but their combat strength was also not bad. Even if these skeletons could no longer use any martial arts after they died, their original strength was still there, so it was not easy to deal with them. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were just newcomers who had just joined the Penglai Palace. Their strength was only at the 5th level of the Purple Realm. Although they were stronger than these skeletons, it was still not easy to deal with such a large number of skeletons. However, after some observation, they found that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three did not have the slightest difficulty when facing the skeletons. On the contrary, their speed of dealing with the skeletons was not much slower than the senior disciples. Seeing this scene, everyone's eyes could not help but light up, and they were surprised. I really didn't see that Junior Brother D and the others' combat strength was not bad. When I first came to this training ground and encountered these skeletons, I couldn't help but be flustered. I didn't expect them to adapt so well. Chu Jinfeng's eyes were filled with amazement and admiration. He had long felt that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three would definitely become a member of the Penglai Inner Palace in the future, but their current performance had already made him very satisfied. Jing Tianlang took the opportunity to take a look and then nodded. These 4 newcomers' abilities are indeed not bad. It seems that the newcomers nowadays are really stronger than the previous. Since they have such combat strength, we don't need to worry for a short time. I just hope that there won't be any other annoying guys. Ren Ziheng's eyes narrowed slightly. He had originally thought that he would be able to return after spending these 2 days safely, but he hadn't expected that something like this would happen today. Now, the only thing he could hope for was that only the skeleton army would appear tonight, and nothing else would appear. Otherwise, their team would definitely suffer a lot of damage. I don't think so. Ren Zimei frowned. This is the outer area. Normally, there are not many skeleton armies. It's just that we happened to encounter one. If something else were to appear, then our luck would be too bad. Of course not. Chu Jinfeng smiled faintly. I'm still waiting to treat you to a meal when we get back. Ren Zimei faintly glanced at Chu Jinfeng. You'd better be careful when facing the enemy. If you're not careful, you'll have to stay in bed to recuperate. Hearing Ren Zimei's words, Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but grin. Zimei, I know you care about me the most. Don't try to take advantage of me with your words. Ren Zimei said coldly. Chapter 34:45. Seeing how fast Chu Jinfeng dodged, Ren Zimei could not help but snort. She could only let it go for now. Don't joke around at a time like this. Be serious. I felt that something was wrong when the skeleton army suddenly appeared here today. Anything can happen in the future. We can't let our guard down. Ren Ziheng was undoubtedly much more mature and steady. Ever since the appearance of this skeleton army, his brows had been tightly knitted. He felt that the skeleton army's appearance today was a little strange. One had to know that this was the outer area of the training ground. Usually, the skeleton army would rarely appear. That was why they had set this place as a place for injured disciples to recuperate. However, an army of skeletons suddenly appeared here today. Could it be that the range of skeletons was constantly expanding? Or was it because the skeleton army also had their own consciousness and knew that they would be staying here, so they deliberately came to cause trouble? Between the two possibilities, no matter which one it was, Ren Ziheng did not think it was a good thing. He only hoped that he had guessed wrong, and the skeleton army's sudden appearance this time was just a coincidence. Hearing Ren Ziheng's words, Ren Zimei and the others stopped joking. In fact, they had never felt relaxed. Every time the skeleton army appeared, there would be a certain number of casualties. As cultivators who had recovered from their injuries, they needed to take care of the injured disciples. It was their responsibility. Countless skeletons kept climbing out from the ground. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other cultivators seemed to be filled with endless attraction to them. They rushed forward dauntlessly, only wanting to make Bailey Hongzhuang and the others a member of the skeleton army. Yuan power kept pouring out from her body. Her figure flashed and quickly dealt with the skeletons in front of her. Vaguely, the skeletons also exerted a certain amount of pressure on her. This was because there were too many skeletons. They did not seem to be fast, but once they were surrounded, the skeletons' hands continuously tore at their bodies. The slightest bit of carelessness would leave behind wounds. Therefore, under such circumstances, they had to speed up their attacks. Once the skeletons got close to them, the situation would only get worse. I finally know why the Inner Palace disciples would be injured by these skeletons despite having such a high cultivation base. There are simply too many of them. One must be fast enough to kill them all. However, after an entire night, anyone who reached the end would feel tired. As long as they were slightly careless and got injured, the situation would only get worse and worse. In the end, they would be drowned by the skeleton army. Just thinking about it was an extremely torturous scene. It was especially hard for anyone to accept dying in this kind of despair. A helpless expression appeared on Shangguan Yingying's face. I feel like we've returned to the scene a month ago when we were besieged by over 200 Outer Palace disciples. I've just said that I don't want to experience that feeling again. I didn't expect it to happen again so soon. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two looked at each other. The scene in front of them was exactly the same as what they had experienced before. However, at that time, they could still hope that Master Long and the others would appear quickly. But in this training ground, they could not count on anything. The only thing they could count on was themselves. Chapter 34:46. From this situation, we can see why the disciples of the Inner Palace are so powerful. If it were anyone else who had a fight like this every night, the speed of their strength improvement would not be slow. Ziren clicked his tongue. Before witnessing this scene with his own eyes, he had never thought that the training ground of the Inner Palace would be so terrifying. It was a little too shocking. The intensity of the training was simply regardless of whether the cultivator could withstand it. Those who could withstand it would become stronger and stronger. Those who could not withstand it would only end up dying there. Not only that, the reason why the relationship between the disciples of the Inner Palace is so trusting and harmonious is also inseparable from this group battle. Everyone relies on each other in life and death. So naturally, they would put aside all the conflicts, Di Beichan said in a deep voice. Although he had yet to go to the training grounds of the Outer Palace disciples, he believed that the training grounds of the Outer Palace disciples were definitely not as dangerous as this place. Only a small team will be needed to deal with any problems. Hence, the conflict between the Outer Palace disciples and the Outer Palace disciples were endless. While they were talking, the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were not idle at all. In the process of fighting, they gradually gained some understanding of the fighting style of the skeletons. When they acted, their eyes and hands were sharp and their hands were fast, quickly harvesting the spiritual fire of the skeletons. However, gradually, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others heard that the movements coming from all around them were getting louder and louder. When they took a closer look, they realized that not only were there skeletons constantly drilling out of the ground in front of them, but there were also skeletons that were beginning to appear around them. Sensing their vitality, the skeletons were also constantly approaching. This situation doesn't seem right. The number of skeletons seems to be increasing. Why are there suddenly so many skeletons around us? Are they trying to surround us? Damn it, this place is usually safe. Why are there suddenly so many skeletons? And from the sound of it, it seems to be increasing. After hearing the sounds, the disciples of the Inner Palace seemed to understand the situation. Although the movements of the skeletons were loud, the footsteps were very heavy, and they could faintly hear the crisp sound of bones. At this moment, the sounds were clearly coming from all directions. With their daily combat experience, the number of skeletons was definitely not small. The faces of Ren Ziheng and the others quickly changed. They immediately shouted, "Everyone, gather together first. This place is too dangerous. We have to think of a way to escape." They knew very well how terrifying the impact of the locust-like skeleton army was. Once they were surrounded, they would only end up being swallowed. Now that they had not figured out the specific situation, they could no longer stay on their own. Only by gathering together would they have a higher chance of survival. Hearing Ren Ziheng's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others did not delay. While clearing the skeletons along the way, they approached Ren Ziheng and the others' direction. The number of skeletons is indeed increasing. Just by listening to the commotion, I'm afraid that a few more holes like this have appeared in the surroundings. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was very dignified. The skeletons that appeared in this pit were already enough to make them tired. If there were more, then the situation would be very bad. Chapter 34:47. According to Chu Jinfeng, it wasn't that the appearance of multiple pits had never happened before. It was just that the probability was very small, and the last time it happened, it could be said that they suffered heavy losses. None of them expected such a situation to happen in the periphery today. Just thinking about it gave Di Beichun a bad premonition. In the face of such a large skeleton army, they might really be drowned by it. Soon, the inner palace disciples had gathered together. Fortunately, the skeletons had not appeared for long, so everyone was in good condition. Even if they were injured, it was only a minor injury. Ren Ziheng, I feel that something is wrong. I'm afraid there are skeletons coming from all directions. We have to find a way to escape. If we continue to stay here, I'm afraid it's not good. Jing Tianlong's face was solemn. The current situation was not a joke. If they were not careful, they would be wiped out. Ren Ziheng nodded. But with our current position, we can't determine which direction is the safe way to escape. Currently, everyone was in a concave area. There were no trees around, so they could not determine the situation of the skeletons above. They could only make a judgment after understanding the situation. Who is a flying, contracted beast? Fly up and take a look. Help us check out the path of retreat. Jing Tianlang shouted. Many of the inner palace disciples had their own contract beasts, but everyone's plan was the same as Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. They did not intend to release their contract beasts before. They would only release their contract beasts when they were about to be unable to hold on any longer. This often gave them a chance to breathe. However, after hearing Jing Tianlong's words, the disciples present could not help but look at each other in dismay. They did have contracted beasts, but flying contracted beasts were very rare among all contracted beasts. They did not have such a contracted beast. After seeing everyone's expression, Jing Tianlang and the others could not help but look terrible. If they did not have a flying contracted beast to help them check the direction, they could only rely on luck. If they made a mistake, they might directly walk into the center of the skeleton army. That would be terrible. At this time, Di Beichun said, "Wait, my contracted beast can check the situation." Hearing Di Beichun's words, everyone could not help but be startled. They did not expect Di Beichun, who was just a newcomer, to have a contracted beast with the ability to fly. Obviously, it was beyond everyone's expectations. In the next second, the mystical fire devil rock flew into the air under Di Beichun's signal. Its gray body with some red light attracted everyone's attention. Seeing Di Beichun's contracted beast, the discerning cultivators immediately recognized the type of contracted beast. Mystical fire devil rock. It's a mystical fire devil rock. My God, the mysterious fire monster rock is the best of the best among the contracted beasts. Even in the entire inner temple, there is only one person who has a mysterious fire monster rock. I did not expect that the newcomer Di Beichun would have a mysterious fire monster rock as his contracted beast. Chapter 34:48. Everyone's eyes lit up the moment they saw the dark fire monstrous rock. Among all the contracted beasts that cultivators were looking forward to, the dark fire monstrous rock was definitely one of the top few contracted beasts. Not only did the dark fire monstrous rock have the ability to fly, but it was also very powerful in battle. Moreover, it had great potential for development and could grow alongside the cultivator. However, the dark fire monstrous rock was rarely seen, let alone a cub of the dark fire monstrous rock. Almost every cultivator who had a dark fire monstrous rock was an object of jealousy. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also knew how rare it was to have a contracted beast of the dark fire monstrous rock. Its appearance had attracted everyone's attention. Fortunately, the berserk earth-splitting tiger and the deep-sea demonic dragon were not released. Otherwise, everyone would be scared to death. Xiao He could not help but say. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. In comparison, if you and Baishir were released, everyone would be even more shocked. The dark fire monstrous rock's grade was extremely high, so it was naturally difficult to see it on a normal day. However, contracted beasts that had reached Purple Realm Level 5 and Purple Realm Level 6 were even rarer. After all, it wasn't an easy task to nurture a contract beast. The amount of energy and expenditure required was terrifying. Although the dark fire monstrous rock had just been born, it was already very close to Beichin. When it knew that Beichin was busy fighting, it had already wanted to come out and help. However, it never had the chance. Now that it finally had the chance to show off, it was naturally very happy. The dark fire monstrous rock rose into the air. After looking around, it truthfully reported the situation to Beichin. After hearing the dark fire monstrous rock's report, Beichin's expression suddenly turned ugly. Ren Ziheng and the others saw the change in Beichin's expression and could not help but ask, Junior Brother D, what's the result? There are 4 similar pits around us, and these skeletons are continuously crawling out of them. We are currently at the center of these pits. Beichin's expression was grave. We must retreat as soon as possible. If we delay any longer, we will be surrounded. Even if they were to retreat now, it would be very difficult for them to do so because the speed at which the skeletons were emerging was simply too fast. Following Beichin's words, everyone's heart sank. Adding the 4 craters to the current one, there were a total of 5 craters. Normally, they were already exhausted from dealing with one pothole. Now that there were 5 potholes, they were completely dead. Then which direction should we retreat in? Beichin pointed in a direction and said, This way. The potholes here are the first to appear, and the pressure to evacuate from here is the lowest. We have to speed up. Ren Ziheng nodded. Zimei, Chu Jinfeng, the 3 of us will open up a path in front. Don't be stingy with the adaptation of your essence force. We must open up a path as quickly as possible. Understood. The rest of you, follow closely behind us and pay attention to the surroundings. Understood. Jing Tianlang, you guys follow behind the 3 of us. Once the 3 of us run out of essence force, you guys immediately replace us. No problem. Chapter 3449. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were newcomers. Even though they had shown good fighting strength, the Inner Palace disciples had always taken it upon themselves to protect their juniors. After all, their cultivation was the weakest in the team. Therefore, the 4 of them were arranged to be in the center of the team, which was the safest position. Ren Ziheng, Ren Zimei, and Chu Jinfeng were at the front with all their might. The elemental energy in their bodies surged out endlessly as they unleashed their martial skills one after another. Previously, everyone wanted to conserve their elemental energy, so the battle waves were not big. Now that they did not plan to conserve their elemental energy, every time they unleashed a martial skill, it would cause a large area of destruction. Once they unleashed their skills, they would directly clear the obstacles in front of them. Under such circumstances, everyone's speed of retreat was extremely fast. The light kept flashing as the 40 over people gathered together and moved forward rapidly. The skeletons behind them were also constantly chasing after them. The cultivators at the back of the team were also under a lot of pressure. While clearing the obstacles in front of them, they also needed to clear the obstacles behind them. Throughout the entire process, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also noticed the tacit understanding between everyone. From the beginning to the end, Ren Ziheng only said a few simple words, and everyone completed the process of retreat very well. It was as if they had done this many times before. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 followed the team from beginning to end. From time to time, they would take care of the skeletons that appeared around them. Their path of retreat was already very difficult. They had to pass through the 2 new pits that appeared. Only then could they find a safe place behind them and concentrate on dealing with the skeleton army. As long as the back was safe, at least they still had a glimmer of hope. However, the number of skeletons that appeared next was a shock to everyone. The number was a little too terrifying. Even though Ren Ziheng and the others' speed of clearing the skeletons was already very fast, the waves of skeletons were even more terrifying. The skeletons in the 6 pits gathered together. It was simply thousands of them. Most importantly, they realized that the ground under their feet was gradually softening, as if it would turn into a swamp at any time. Suddenly, a scream came from behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang turned around, and only then did she realize that a cultivator was directly pulled into the swamp-like ground by the skeletons. How could this be? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be stunned, but her reaction speed was also extremely fast. She and Di Beichun acted almost at the same time, directly grabbing the hands of the practitioner and pulling him out of the swamp. Rip! A tearing sound accompanied by a heart-wrenching scream suddenly sounded. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun found that the cultivator's legs had been directly pulled off. Taking a closer look, they could see the bloody legs in the pit being held by the skeleton's arm. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's beautiful face quickly surged with shock. This was simply too terrifying. Di Beichun didn't hesitate to carry the cultivator on his back. He said to Bailey Hongzhuang, "Let's go quickly. This land is going to change soon." Chapter 3450. After flying for some distance, Bailey Hongzhuang finally stepped on solid ground again. When she turned around, she found that behind them, the swamp had gradually turned into a new pit. "Oh my God, this is too terrifying. We're going to be completely surrounded." Shangguan Yingying's face was full of fear. The sudden scene before made her feel a little scared. This was really too terrifying. At this moment, she finally understood why Ren Ziheng and the others said that it was best not to see the skeleton army. Because once they saw it, they might not be able to see tomorrow's sun again. How can this be? Why are there so many pits? Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but curse. Even if he had stayed in this training ground for a long time, it was the first time that so many pits suddenly appeared. This was completely not giving them any chance to survive. I don't know what is going on either. This has never happened before. Ren Ziheng was also a little stunned. Usually, there would only be one pit in each place. He didn't expect that all the pits would gather here today. Judging from this trend, they were doomed. An indescribable pressure spread in everyone's hearts. None of them were fools. Under such a situation, they were basically left with only one possibility, and that was death. However, none of them were willing to say this out loud. It was as if as long as they said it, they would completely lose all hope. It's useless to think about that now. Let's do our best to escape. We'll hold on for as long as we can. As long as we can hold on until dawn, we'll be victorious, Ren Zime said in a low voice. However, there was a hint of misery in her voice. These words were only meant to comfort himself. That's right. We can't give up until the last moment. There is always a way out. Ren Ziheng nodded. Everyone was still retreating quickly. If they didn't leave this area quickly, they would really die. In the process of evacuation, the number of injured practitioners was constantly increasing. Di Beichun was always carrying an injured practitioner, and Bailey Hongzhuang was also supporting another injured person. A tragic atmosphere was quietly spreading. Ren Ziheng and the others were trying their best to open a path. Everyone understood that whether they could survive or not depended on whether they could rush out or not. Finally, when Ren Ziheng and the others Yuan Qi was almost exhausted, they successfully walked to a safer area. In front of them, there was a cave, and the cave entrance was very narrow. It could only accommodate a few practitioners standing here. After seeing the cave, Ren Ziheng and the others' eyes couldn't help but light up. He said, "Everyone, quickly enter the cave." Bailey Hongzhuang and the others rushed into the cave, and the injured practitioners finally got a chance to catch their breath. There is still a long time before dawn. The only thing we can do is to guard the entrance of the cave. As long as we don't let these skeletons enter the cave, we will have a chance to survive. Ren Ziheng's face was solemn and serious. This was the biggest challenge he had encountered when protecting the injured disciples. Chapter 3451. Upon hearing Ren Ziheng's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others looked at each other and agreed. Based on the current situation, this was the best way. Only then would they have a chance of survival. Every inner palace disciple was not weak. As long as every cultivator held on for a certain amount of time, the other cultivators would quickly recover their origin energy. They could still hold on until dawn. Let's do that. Jing Tianling nodded. The three of you have been leading the way for so long. You've used up a lot of your origin energy. It's our turn now. Upon hearing Jing Tianlong's words, Ren Ziheng thought about his current situation and did not force himself. All right, you guys hold on for a while. After saying that, Ren Ziheng found a place to sit down in the cave and began to consume pills to recover his origin energy. Under such circumstances, having sufficient origin energy was undoubtedly the most important thing. Bailey Hongzhuang had already consumed pills to replenish her origin energy. Renzime began to arrange for the next round of cultivators to continue guarding the cave. She included all the cultivators who had combat strength. Not long after, Renzime's gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. When the time comes, the four of you will fight the skeleton army together. Are you confident? If not, I'll arrange for you to fight with the other senior brothers and senior sisters. In such a situation, as long as you have some combat strength, you have to use it. You understand, right? Renzime was a little helpless. Logically speaking, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were newcomers and did not have much experience in dealing with the skeleton army. As their senior sister, she had previously said that she would protect them well. However, they were now forced to face the difficulties. Although the inner palace disciples' cultivation was stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, they were originally a gathering of injured people. Their combat strength was not comparable to their peak. In comparison, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were in the best condition in their team. Senior Sister Run, don't worry. The four of us won't have a problem, Bailey Hongzhuang said. Although the skeleton army was terrifying, the cultivation of the four of them was not bad. As long as they stood at the entrance of the cave, they could still do it. Renzime smiled when she saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were not afraid of death at all. On the contrary, they were very cooperative. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were undoubtedly much better than the Outer Palace's cultivators who had no ability and were arrogant. It was no wonder that everyone was so close to them. That's good. Anyway, we're all in the cave. If you can't hold on, we'll go and help you. Thank you, senior sister. Bailey Hongzhuang circulated her heaven-defying mental cultivation method to recover the elemental energy in her body. She held 2 spirit stones in her hands, which was the only way for her to recover quickly. Her cultivation technique was originally of the highest grade, so her speed of recovering essence energy was much faster than ordinary cultivators. Although Di Beichen's cultivation technique was not as good as Bailey Hongzhuang's, he was now a heavenly mandate body. The speed of his elemental energy absorption was also very shocking. After spending some time, Bailey Hongzhuang's elemental energy had recovered to its peak state. This was also because her elemental energy consumption was not large. After opening her eyes, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but look at the situation outside the cave. Chapter 3452. At a glance, the outside of the cave was densely packed with eerie white bones. The bright red flames that leaped about were indescribably eerie. From afar, the red flames looked as if they were burning the entire area. Jing Tianlang and the others had already been replaced. At this moment, it was the other 3 inner palace disciples' turn to resist the advance of the skeletons. Outside the cave, the skeletons' bones had already piled up into a mountain. Faced with such a large number of skeletons, they had no other choice but to use their martial skills. Relying on their own strength, they would not be able to deal with the endless stream of skeletons. Once the skeletons broke through their line of defense, their companions behind them would suffer. Therefore, the 3 cultivators took turns to use their martial skills. Every time a cultivator used a martial skill, the other 2 cultivators would hold onto spiritual stones in their hands and try to recover as much of their yuan power as possible. Moreover, everyone had a tacit understanding. They did not immediately use their martial skills after one of them had finished using his martial skills. Instead, they waited for more skeletons to charge before continuing to use their martial skills. Although it did not seem like much time had passed, as long as they accumulated the time, they would at least be able to withstand a few more waves of attacks. As long as they could hold on long enough, they would have the hope of leaving this place alive. After Bailey Hongzhuang saw the methodical attack of the Inner Palace disciples, she couldn't help but feel admiration in her heart. However, the terrifying number of skeletons still made people's hearts heavy. Junior Sister Bailey, have you recovered your Yuan power? Rinzame could not help but ask when she saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had stood up. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded when she heard that. I've recovered. Then, Junior Sister, do you still have any healing medicine on you? Everyone's injuries are quite serious. Given the current situation, Rinzame was a little helpless and found it hard to speak. Ever since Bailey Hongzhuang had joined their team, they had taken advantage of Bailey Hongzhuang. Just the healing medicine that Bailey Hongzhuang had given them would be worth a lot if they were to sell it. Now that she had asked Bailey Hongzhuang for help, even she felt that she had gone overboard. However, under such circumstances, she had no other choice. I still have some healing medicine here. Everyone, please use it first. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately understood and said, I was planning to bandage everyone's wounds anyway. Junior Sister Bailey will definitely return these to you when we get back. Rinzame could not help but speak up. Bailey Hongzhuang's understanding made her heave a sigh of relief. However, they could not openly take advantage of Bailey Hongzhuang just because she did not bicker. She only thought of returning to Bailey Hongzhuang when they got back. Senior Sister Run, Bailey Hongzhuang's. Bailey. Furthermore, these are just healing medicine and not some amazing treasure. I only hope that everyone can hold on until dawn arrives. The current situation was so unfavorable. As long as these injured cultivators could recover a little, it meant that their chances of survival would increase.